Yep. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is March 2nd. Welcome to House Economic Matters Committee. Today we have 7 bills and 67 oral witnesses. Just FYI for everyone, I know it has been quite warm in here lately. We do have the windows open, but if you want to go ahead and remove your jackets, unless you're testifying, go ahead. You can put your jackets on the back of the chair. For witnesses, you are the bill sponsor. There's no limit, but for witnesses, we do restrict you to 2 minutes. We have a lot of witnesses to get through. Delegate Aarons has a hair appointment he's got to get to, so we're going to be strict. It's nothing personal. And for members, again, just ask very pointed questions. All right, with that, first up, we have House Bill 1187, Delegate Frazier Hidalgo. You can start when ready, Delegate.
Is it all right if I bring my panel up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, for indulging me with House Bill 1187. So I think that the committee in prior years has heard similar testimony on this, but House Bill 1187 is a peer-to-peer car sharing insurance and liability. And essentially what that means is it would codify that the driver of a vehicle engaged in a peer-to-peer platform like Turo is, if they're at fault in an accident or an incident, that their insurance is sought first. Currently, it's the opposite, where it's the platform's car insurance that pays out first, and this would change that to make it the driver. If insufficient coverage, then the peer-to-peer company would assume liability. Basically, it just moves them into the backup instead of the primary position and moves them into the backup position. It's really that simple of a bill. And I am happy to now pass it on to my colleague to talk in a little bit more detail and then take questions if that's appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Chris DePietro. I'm here on behalf of Turo. Turo is a peer-to-peer car sharing platform. For those of you who are on this committee in 2018, you'll recall that this committee and the General Assembly passed a kind of groundbreaking legislation. It was the first really modern peer-to-peer car sharing statute in the country. But one of the things about going first is you don't necessarily get it 100% right. Since that time, there were revisions. There was work at NCOIL with the insurance industry to address this very specific issue of primary and secondary liability coverage. What this bill does is conform that national model to Maryland statute. Leading up to this, the bill introduction, we worked with our insurance partners. We also worked with the Maryland Department of Maryland Insurance Administration. There's a set of amendments that the sponsor didn't mention that are purely technical in nature that I think were already submitted to the committee. There's going to be 2 additional amendments in further conversations with MAIF and also with the MIA. There were 2 declarative amendments that just neatened up some of the language, and we are going to submit that for your consideration as well. But again, this is just a pretty straightforward issue. There shouldn't be, I think, too many issues with it, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel and this bill hearing. We will move on to the next bill, which is also Delegate Frazier Hidalgo, House Bill 834. I want to welcome our colleagues from E&T, Delegates Ziegler, Jacobs, and Guyton, who are here in the back. And Delegate, if you want to bring up your panel and start when ready.
Okay. Okay. Is there anybody here? No. Okay. All right. Members of the committee again, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Delegate David Frazier Hidalgo here to present House Bill 834, EV Charging Reliability Act. This bill is very interesting because in some ways it's an extension of what the public utilities already do when it comes to electric vehicle chargers. So as this committee knows, we are trying to increase the amount and the number of chargers throughout the state. We have to build out our electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And in doing that, what we have found is that there are third-party private companies that are putting up chargers. And also because of the need to accelerate this, a couple of years ago, the utilities, the PSC has allowed the utilities to get into the charging market. And so the utilities have put up a series of charging infrastructure, chargers around the state. And what we have also found is in multi-dwelling units, multi-dwelling houses, often it's a little bit more challenging to get private companies to put in chargers in those multi-dwelling houses. And it's also sometimes not cost-effective for certain neighborhoods or certain dwellings that just don't maybe have the financial resources. So this bill also allows, under certain circumstances, for the utilities to go in and put in chargers in those particular neighborhoods. And then the other thing that it does is that it establishes a series of guidelines and uptime, because one of the issues that's going on in the private industry as well as the utility industry is that sometimes you have folks that are showing up for chargers to charge their vehicles and the chargers aren't working. And this has become kind of a significant problem. So one of the things that this bill does is it establishes kind of a baseline of and a measurement so that you can measure what is uptime to try to encourage them to make sure that these chargers are up and running. It's a 97% uptime. There's a couple of exemptions for that, like force majeure, vandalism, things of that nature. And we have a couple of amendments that are in your packet, and we're working on one other amendment to kind of potentially working with the PSC to create a kind of a cap. And that's really the essence of the bill. There's a little bit more detail to it than that, but I'll let my colleague testify as well, and then I'm happy to take some questions.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. David Lapp here for the Office of People's Counsel. I want to first say that as a general matter, we're not supportive of the utilities being involved in the EV charging market. It's a competitive market. And it is a pilot program, and one of the reasons why we support this is because of the sunset date of 2005, putting that into law. Utilities are losing money on their charging stations, which means that other ratepayers are picking up the ratepayers are picking up the tab for those losses. Competitive EV charging companies do not have that benefit of having ratepayers pick up the difference if they're losing money. That said, given that this EV pilot program is going on, we think it should support multifamily dwellings, and for that reason, we think that provision, the multifamily dwellings in underserved communities, is a good thing to have in the bill. And we also believe that if the utilities are in this market, they should be held to performance standards. And for that reason, those reasons, we ask the committee for a favorable report.
Okay. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. Next, we will have David Waybright, Lanny Hartman, and that is it for the favorable at the moment. And you can start when ready, gentlemen. We do have two favorable virtual witnesses, but we'll come to them after all the in-person testimony is finished. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, member of the committee. My name is Lanny Hartman. I'm an EV driver and a BGE ratepayer. For years, we've been told that public charging has 98% uptime, 99% uptime, even 100% uptime. Last year, a study was released by the University of California that looked at the reliability of the fast chargers in the San Francisco Bay Area. The study found that only 75% were functional. I had my own concerns about charger reliability, so I conducted my own test of fast chargers in Maryland. In August, I visited all the fast chargers owned and operated by BGE. What I found was that 71% of them were fully functional. And in other words, 1 out of 3 were broken. For every station that didn't work, I reported the issue to customer service. I compiled my findings and presented them to the Public Service Commission at a hearing in September. You have that report in my written testimony. 2 months later, I visited all 69 stations again. This time I found that only 65% were operational. The reliability had actually gotten worse. There's a wide gap between what we're being told about charging reliability and what EV drivers are actually experiencing. The PSC and lawmakers need quality data to inform decision-making. We deserve transparency and accountability for EV charging infrastructure that's being built with public funds. That's what this bill will do. Thank you. I ask you for a favorable report.
Hello, my name is David Waybright. Thank you, Chair and the committee. Like he was saying, I'm an EV driver. I'm from Cecil County. I live in Elkton, and I've experienced similar issues. I haven't done to great lengths to test the network, but I have seen issues. The reliability, as I'm being told, is being presented as 90% uptime. That's not what I've experienced. The other thing is that I've heard different tactics be used as well as not only utilities but vendors have stated adapters aren't compatible or that your car is not compatible when I report different issues or when I've seen other EV drivers report issues. And the thing is that the same charger has had the same issue reported by multiple people with multiple cars on PlugShare and different apps like that that are public-driven apps on reliability stats that people are seeing. The problem is over half of these issues are reported as being successful charges because some might be it might only have charged for 1 second or charged for 1 minute, as well as the connectors may not, one connector may work, one connector may not work. So they say the station or the location is online, even though it's not.
So we're going to need you to just conclude or wrap up
Okay.
quickly.
So basically, the last statement I want to say is that we've already seen failures in the past with the initial rollout that where farms did. All of their chargers are now offline and bagged up. I just don't want to see that happen again with the public utilities.
Okay.
The state is giving money to them, and we want to see the money go to good use.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. Next, we'll go to the in-person favorable with amendments. Tom Clark. You can start when ready, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tom Clark. I'm with IBW Local 26. I like this bill. I like to, we're working with underserved communities and multifamily dwellings, very important. I would just add one amendment, and that amendment would read, installation of electrical vehicle charging stations shall be performed by Certified Electrical Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program, EVITP installers. The witness before, a little earlier, said about utilities and performance standards, and this is what it's going to do. This has got nothing to do with the IBW. This is collaboration of industry experts, automakers, utilities, and electrical inspectors. And it'll make everything uniform and give a little bit of knowledge. It would take an electrician 20 hours online for this training, and that includes the exam and everything. So it would suit the uniformity of the charges going in, especially as they're going in mass numbers now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. Next, we have two info in person, Lisa Smith and Joey Chen, both from the PSC.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and committee members. Joey Chen, Senior Commission Advisor at the PSC. I'm here today to offer informational testimony on HB 834. Now, the Commission is neutral to the expansion of the current EV charging pilot for allowing utilities to install electric vehicle chargers in underserved communities. However, I do want to highlight two concerns that we raised in our letter of information for the committee's consideration. Now, we've shared these concerns with the bill sponsor and do appreciate working with them on suitable amendments. The first point relates to ratepayer cost impacts. And unlike the current EV pilot multi-unit dwelling offerings, HB 834 would allow the pilot utilities to install both level 2 chargers and more powerful DC fast chargers without any cost cap associated with this deployment. Now, this could lead to substantial cost impacts as fast chargers are much more expensive than L2 chargers, and they carry more distribution system related upgrade costs. The Commission has suggested amendment language that would limit the expanded multi-unit dwelling deployment to L2 chargers only, which is what we currently allow for the pilot, and it would allow the Commission to consider reasonable cost limitations in the public interest. Now, second, the bill's 97% uptime requirement, it aligns with recently issued federal reliability standards for NEVI public chargers. The Commission feels that having this standard in statute, when it's paired with the utilities' reporting obligations, this will be more than sufficient to secure or ensure their compliance. Otherwise, the utilities will risk being in violation of the law. The Commission therefore proposes amending the bill to remove Section 7905, which directs the Commission to require that utilities maintain an adequate number of staff as determined by the Commission, as there are other ways to ensure that the utilities will meet this uptime standard. So therefore, I thank you for your time, and I'm available to answer your questions.
Lisa Smith, Director of Legislative Affairs for the Maryland Public Service Commission. Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'll be quick. I just want to add that the Commission is very proud of the EV charger program, which is, we believe, is a model program to address the state's climate change goals and in a cost-effective manner. And we thank the sponsor for bringing forward ideas about how to push the program forward. We really appreciate the graciousness with which the sponsor has engaged with us, and we believe that the amendments that we're working on together should address these concerns, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So, in reading the bill on page 3, lines 16 through 18, it says an electric company operating EV charging network shall, I always perks my interest when I see the word may and shall, so shall ensure that EV charging stations in the EV charging network have an average annual time at 97% or greater. So what's the consequence of this provision in the bill? Is there some remedy or penalty to the electric company that would be levied by the PSC? Or, you know, we've heard people testify about the reliability, so I'm just wondering what that part of the bill means.
Thank you for that question. So the Commission has authority today to impose whatever remedies, including civil penalties, for any violation of Commission order, Maryland state law, or regulation. So the thought is, if the 97% uptime requirement now becomes statute, then the utilities are obligated by this statutory requirement to meet that. And if they don't, then they could be subject to violation, which the Commission could then levy penalties appropriate with that violation.
So what type of penalty would it be? I mean, generally.
Well, it's we would have to look, the commission would have to look at the facts that are specific to a potential, alleged violation. Let me take one step back and just note that the bill also provides for a reporting requirement on a quarterly basis. So this is this is the way that the commission will be receiving data to track how the utilities are performing. So at any point in time, an interested third party, for example, on a filing of any one of these reports could submit comments and charge or flag something for the commission that a particular utility is failing in their uptime obligation. So at which point the commission can then review the facts pursuant to whatever filings that are also accompanied through staff or any other parties like People's Counsel, and then in the totality of everything before the commission would determine what would be the appropriate next steps. Now, one of the things in the commission could in terms of a max penalty, this could be the levying of civil penalties. But just before we even go there, the commission could, in other instances, direct the utilities to submit things like a corrective plan of sorts. And this would require the utilities to outline how they are going to correct their compliance.
Thank you very much.
Delegate Aaron's.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question, do you all agree with the statistics that the gentleman presented before, the downtime, uptime statistics that you said reliability?
Delegate, yes, this has been, it was accurate that this is information that's been discussed before the commission,
Okay.
correct?
Okay, so you're aware of it. What have you all done about it? I mean, that's pretty bad when you look at that uptime. That's not exactly considered decent. You all are the ones that allow the rates to increase for these very tools that we're supposed to be getting. We're not getting what we possibly should be expecting for the dollars that you're spending, ratepayers' dollars here. So what have you been able to do? What is your position? I'm sure it wasn't his bill, or maybe it was his bill. I'm not sure.
Delegate, thank you for the question. The commission did identify this as a problem in the mid-course program review back in the fall of last year, and directed specifically that the EV working group sit down with stakeholders and chart a path forward for addressing reliability. And the EV working group did submit a report detailing not only what they've been discussing, but also what's happening at the federal level. And it was flagged for the commission in the report that the stakeholder parties felt that additional guidance at the federal level will be very beneficial. And so it wasn't until actually just a couple weeks ago that the federal standards were issued. And so, to make a long story short, that now having the federal standards on one side to balance and to weigh whatever commission action and regulations, if we were to go the regulation route, this will set the bar for the utility-owned chargers for sure.
But of course, if I'm sorry.
Go ahead, no.
Well, if legislation passes, of course.
That's right.
If this bill passes, we'll be implementing that, of course.
This will be back on the ratepayers again, though. This whatever standard you put today will go back to the ratepayers. And the PSC is okay with the fact that we're going to install these multifamily dwellings at the expense of all the ratepayers, not the users, or am I misunderstanding that?
No, your understanding is correct in the sense that the utility EV programs, including the chargers that they install, own, and operate, are to go into, or I would say rate-based eligible. So those costs would then come in a rate case, and then would be evaluated for reasonableness, for prudent spending, consistent with the way that we look at things. Yes. So yeah, but you are correct that that goes to our concern about potential cost impacts in terms of expanding and especially allowing much more powerful charging stations, fast chargers, to be installed at these locations as well.
So, Delegate, I just wanted to mention, you see us up here a lot mentioning how much bills cost, because of course just and reasonable rates are part of our statutory charge the Commission takes very seriously, so we want the policymakers to have all the information. We believe here, there's, with the amendments that we're working with the sponsor on, it's not overly prescriptive like some other bills, and it allows the Commission to work within its current process and do a cost-benefit analysis before any recovery is allowed. So we do believe the discretion's there to be able to manage that issue.
Okay, my final point, Mr. Chair, please bear with me. my comment is really, this next one is based on a lot of the bills you see here. We're really concerned about people that cannot afford electricity. They can't afford the rates. They can't do it. These chargers, which are, I can assure you, in our deeper cities, the people that can't afford the rate, the bills that they're charged now, the rates are charged now, they're not buying these EV cars yet. We're going to put another layer of cost onto those bills to further hurt them. I'm asking if that's something you all consider at all.
That is something that is factored in the commission's overall determination of what's in the public interest, certainly. And in the mid-course review process, the point did come up in terms of whether or not the commission should approve a limited deployment of utility-owned chargers specifically in the multi-unit dwelling space. And the reason why the commission balanced the costs and the policy interest that would be served in approving a limited number weighed in favor of approving that limited number.
I would say that in the EV statute as it stands now, there really isn't, equity isn't built in, but that could be something that could be amended or discussed that if the
I would like,
legislature-
if you could, provide me the information where this is reasonably fair and decent and good for anybody that can't afford these type vehicles. I would like to see I'd like to see the information on that. Thank you.
We can follow up,
Yep,
Delegate.
Please follow up. Delegate Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Delegate Aarons was covering kind of cost recovery. So just to underscore his point, to make sure I understand, the cost recovery, if there are 100 new charging stations put in across the state, cost recovery by the utilities is not on the users of those charging stations. It's on all electricity users.
It's both. There's a charge as well, but yeah, correct.
But the cost recovery of having to upgrade the transmission lines and underground lines or above ground lines for these fast speed charging stations would go on all ratepayers. That portion of it, correct?
Yes,
Okay, not on the people that are just using the charging station.
not solely on the users, correct.
Has the PSC ever looked into or done a study of the disruptive technological effect of some other technology like hydrogen and the danger of stranded costs by utilities by installing all of these charging stations?
We have not,
Okay.
to my knowledge.
Because it does seem like, obviously, you would have to be instructed to do that, I presume, or maybe not. But it does seem like there's a distinct danger with technology moving at the pace that it is, that we are being so prescriptive as a legislature of you must use and only use an electric vehicle, when in fact there are plenty of other technologies that are out there that might be far superior, that would cause the electric utilities to put all this money into upgrading their transmission lines underground and above ground, as well as putting all these EV stations, causing electricity prices to go up unnecessarily when there's another technology over here that's better. Does that seem like something that's worth it for you guys to study so that we really know whether we're diving in head first when we shouldn't be?
We could certainly take that back to our technical staff
you.
and get back to you.
Thank you.
All right. Delegate Frazier Hidalgo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of quick questions. I know we had some conversations about the difference between level 2 and level 3. If we amend level 3 out, that, according to your testimony, that reduces some of your concerns significantly. Is that correct?
It does, Delegate, because under the current pilot, as you know, the level 2 chargers there is a general predisposition to install or to have more utility level 2 chargers at these multi-unit dwelling locations. And staff did an analysis, and with the stakeholder input, realized that the costs are significant, the difference between installing the L2 versus.
Okay, and that makes sense. In these multi-dwelling units that people might be charging overnight, it might not be a 15-minute charge. It might be a 6 or 7 or 8-hour charge, depending on. So that makes sense. The second question I had was, for these units, whether they're multi-dwelling units or the chargers that are being put up everywhere, they're open to the public. So when someone comes to charge, they have to pay for it, correct? Whether it's in that particular dwelling unit or not, they're actually paying for the electricity they're drawing. So this is not something where the PSC is authorizing the utilities to go out and put these chargers up, and anybody who's a ratepayer or not can charge for free. They have to pay for those electrons.
The supply, the commodity, yes.
Okay.
For the actual electrons, yes. But for the distribution side, cost to install, prep the site, that's different. That's different.
Right. And then thirdly, because it was it was brought up in this hearing that the cost of electric vehicles is substantially greater, or insinuated that it was greater. Do you know what the cost of, let's say, a 5-year-old EV is on the market now? I mean, do you know what those ranges are?
Delegate, that would be outside of the PSC expertise.
Okay.
I don't.
So
we
it
do not
would,
know.
it would or wouldn't surprise you to know that you could pick up a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old Nissan Leaf for $5,000 or $6,000?
We will take your word for it,
Okay.
Delegate.
I just want to make sure people don't think that all these EVs cost, you know, $75,000 or $100,000 when you can pick up used ones now for far, far, far less. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Seeing no further questions, that concludes this panel. We'll now go to the favorable virtual. Both in. Lynn Parsons. And Ms. Parsons, you can start when ready.
Hi, Lynn Parsons. I lived in Bethesda, Maryland, the grateful recipient of the PEPCO rebate for EV level 2 charging in a multi-dwelling community. And it has dispelled a lot of myths that my community had about what would happen when you have EV chargers in your community. And people have started moving to the neighborhood because of those EV chargers. What I'm experiencing as the owner of a Nissan Leaf that is 5 years old and has 100,000 miles on it, more and more people are showing up to charging stations without another place to charge other than public charging. And that puts additional contention on these. I, with this Leaf with lower range, am forced to use public charging more frequently because I have to fill up again. And what I'm finding is that more and more often these charging stations are not being maintained. And a number of them, I'm not going to say they're the utilities, it could be anybody's charging station, but they're receiving funding to put them in, and then they're not maintaining them. And real people are out there with lives and obligations and places that they have to get to. Most recently, I moved a couple miles away to Kensington, settlement on my house, went to come home to my new house, and I was stuck because I went to a charging station that was not working. So I am thrilled that the utilities are putting in chargers. They know how to deliver the energy, but I do believe that this bill will really help in making sure that we are ensuring these chargers are available to people.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Next, seeing no questions, we'll go to Scott Wilson. Sir, go ahead and start when ready. Sir, you're on mute. You unmuted and then went back on mute.
Okay.
I got you.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll just briefly expand on my written testimony. We've been driving EVs since 2012, and we've used every variety of public charging. We have to remember that the driver is at the end of a sequence of events that must all work. First, can the charger be activated? Second, does the charger start charging? And lastly, is it charging at the correct rate? The failure of any one of these elements, including slow charging, should be classified as a non-charge event. This bill does that in that it defines what we mean by uptime as successfully dispensing electricity as designed. This is just common sense. Having power or pinging the charger is necessary, but not sufficient to get a true picture of the state of the charger. This is in part a fairness issue, since there will be a significant fraction of Maryland drivers who can only park on streets and will thus be relying on neighborhood fast chargers for their main charging. It's not unreasonable that they should expect basically the same level of reliability that people who charge at home. No one expects that DC fast chargers will never have problems. The issue is getting feedback on and resolution to problems when they occur. Gathering charger data is only the first part. It must be acted on. I believe that the vast majority of EV drivers want utility-operated fast charging to succeed. Everyone wins, including the utilities. Now's the time to perfect the attainment and maintenance of the liability standards, since the demand for neighborhood fast charging will only increase. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no questions, that concludes this bill hearing. Next, we'll go to House Bill 1035, which is the chair's, and an intern from his office will be briefing. Okay, all right. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of House Economic Matters Committee. For the record, Brian Crosby, intern with Chair Wilson's office, here to present House Bill 1035. This is actually a result of a commission-led two-year study which involved multiple stakeholders, from ratepayers to both low-income and moderate-income advocates, environmental advocates, utilities, and state agencies. For a state policy perspective, we're making the shift, as many of you will remember, from the Climate Solutions Now Act from last year, away from energy efficiency as our highest priority to the reduction of greenhouse gas. Transitioning Empower Maryland, which the bill really gets at, to a greenhouse gas reduction goal will harness the successful program to serve the state's climate policies, and now is the opportune moment before the launch of the 2024 to 2026 program cycle. The legislation specifically directs the Department of Housing and Community Development into programs as a provider of low-income offerings, and will establish low-income goals going forward to serve this important population. And finally, the bill invites Maryland Department of Environment to join the PSC's technical staff, Office of People's Counsel, and Maryland Energy Administration in reviewing and providing analysis on the program, and I urge a favorable report.
Good afternoon. Go ahead. Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, and good afternoon, members. Again, Lisa Smith, Director of Legislative Affairs for the Maryland Public Service Commission. And thank you, Vice Chair Crosby, for doing such a great job introducing Chair Wilson's bill. So HB 1035, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Programs, is intended to be a proposal for the legislature to consider to repurpose and update the thus far successful energy efficiency programs to our new state policy goals as set by the legislature, and to require the commission to set greenhouse gas reduction standards going forward, which is much more in line with current goals. As was mentioned, there was a two-year commission-led process, including a broad array of stakeholders that unanimously agreed to certain recommendations. We know that the legislature might decide to go much further or amend this bill, but we wanted to come in before the program cycle begins again with a bill that would transition to a greenhouse gas reduction program. And the bill does include the gas utilities. They would be required to offer programs to their customers as well to reduce greenhouse gas reductions. There would also be a specific low-income goal to ensure that this vulnerable customer group is adequately served. And there will be another bill hearing today from Delegate Tarkoudian. We've been in conversations as well, talking about how the bills can work together, so the statutory framework supports that goal. So thank you, Delegate Tarkoudian, for bringing that as well. This bill accomplishes multiple tasks. If you look at your packets, you'll find supporting testimony from the other implementing agencies, from Maryland Department of the Environment and Maryland Energy Administration, and as well as from implementing utilities. There are a number of things in the bill that does not change statute. First, the bill leaves existing program structures, such as plan review, cycle timelines, and semi-annual reporting, largely untouched. In all of these areas, the bill's changes are simply designed to align statute with current commission processes. And of course, that is, many stakeholders are involved in that process. We abide by the Administrative Procedure Act's open hearings. Second, the bill does not specify the low-income or utility greenhouse gas reduction goals. We'll leave that to the legislature to decide. The commission specifically did not have information in its processes about rate impacts that would support setting a specific target at this time based on the testimonies and input from agencies like OPC, Low Income Advocates, MEA, so that's why we didn't come forward with that. But we understand that maybe looped in once we connect the different bills. We're happy to work with those other agencies, implementing utilities and others, to work in a work group or subcommittee to hash this all out. The bill sets the state's climate commitments in the environmental article as the program's North Star. It's the most important part, is the greenhouse gas reduction goals of the state. It would allow the commission to set targets when program proposals are provided from the participants, along with cost and bill impacts to address low income and equity concerns. And finally, the bill does not require, codify, or prohibit any specific program offerings. This is exactly the same as an existing law. The program design will also be done by the commission-based inclusive proposal review process. And to that end, as Vice Chair mentioned, we'll be expanding the statutory agencies involved to advise on the adequacy of the plans to meet the state climate goals. And we are happy to answer any questions.
Good afternoon, Molly Knoll. I'm a senior advisor with the Maryland Public Service Commission. I've had the pleasure to work on the Empower programs for 10 years, first with the Office of People's Counsel and now with the Commission. I just want to talk a little bit about what this bill does and what it doesn't do. So the bill does not provide specific targets, and the Commission is not in a position to make recommendations on targets without full cost information. The new targets that were set in the CSNA last year are likely going to double program costs with the end of the lighting programs. And transitioning to greenhouse gases means that if we are going to be spending additional funds, we're going to spend them towards the actual current state priorities, which is greenhouse gas reductions. The most bang for the buck can be achieved by doing this solely looking at greenhouse gas reductions rather than looking at EE as support for greenhouse gas reductions. The reason there are no specific numbers in here is because the Commission simply does not have the analysis yet to say what those look like. We've worked through our 2-year process. We received input from stakeholders. We had a potential study done by the utilities. We've had hearings on this. Despite all of that, the numbers just aren't there yet. So what the bill does, subject to the legislature's discretion, is allows the Commission to set those targets at the end of the year when programs come in and we have a full picture of what the programs are, what can be accomplished, and what the actual ratepayer impacts would look like. The second thing that the bill does not do is it does not change any of the existing processes. All stakeholders will still have input into the proposals, all stakeholders will still have time in front of the Commission, and the Commission will still run the programs the same as it always has, to the same high cost effectiveness standards that have delivered $1.60 for every dollar that's been spent on the program to date. I'll yield the remainder of my time, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, intern, for
You're welcome.
bringing this bill.
This
I
is
have
a great
some
bill.
questions for- I have some questions for the Public Service Commission. So first, just thanks for your, I mean, obviously, this is the direction we have to go in terms of greenhouse gas instead of energy measurement, so appreciate that. I do have some concerns, and I'm looking forward to working with you, with the sponsor of the other bill, with a lot of the stakeholders in the room. I'm hoping we can move forward with something that really makes sense to meet our greenhouse gas goals. But there's a couple of things I want to ask more about. I think the biggest concern is the lack of the targets in the bill. And we're about to hear, as you said, my low-income energy efficiency bill in a moment. And of course, the low-income advocates came to the PSC in 2016 and asked for the PSC to set a low-income target. And the PSC had work groups for 6 years, never set a target, and then I started bringing the legislation here. So, like, that experience does have me concerned about the, you know, how quickly they'll come, and then whether the ones that will come will be appropriate to meet the legislature's goals. It feels like it's our responsibility to make sure there's some numbers in there. And so you could say more about that if you want. I'm just wondering if you can work with us to actually put numbers in before it leaves our hands, because that's I think that's the concern, that's the first concern that I have.
So, as you know, Delegate, the Commission did not oppose your low-income bill. There's a letter of information, and we don't. If the
Sorry, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the history of work groups at the PSC related to the low-income piece and getting to a number. That's what I was referring to, not the bill that's in front of me.
I understand the question,
Okay.
Delegate. So I just want to make clear that the two, I wanted to separate the two because I think Molly was speaking about, she maybe didn't say greenhouse gas reduction each time, but she was speaking more to that goals when comparing the two bills. And to date, the commission has not ever had, again, we are initiating a goal-setting proceeding, and within the past number of weeks, I've referenced the testimony that's come in, but that this is the first time it's ever been discussed. Of course, as a quasi-judicial agency, the commission can only consider what is submitted to it from all the parties. So that's why I mentioned the testimony that's come in. Of course, we're just embarking in this process. The legislature, of course, can decide they want to lock in unknown costs. That's not, I'm saying the commission has not received enough information to date, nor has put anything in their order that would support a goal. So at this time, we're not prepared to, with data, our technical staff does not have this information to provide that today, is all we're saying. Again, as well, if the legislature wants to at least do something this year to embark us on the 2024-26 cycle and get started, and then come back once there's more information, that's another option as well.
Okay, can I ask one other question?
Sure, go ahead.
My follow-up question is that I'm troubled with the continuation of subsidizing gas infrastructure. And I'm especially troubled, and I'm going to ask you to speak to this, but I want to just highlight a couple things. I think that the General Assembly has clearly pointed that we're headed in the direction of electrification. There's been concern amongst some members of the General Assembly, and so that's clearly the direction we're headed, but then there's the study of the impact on the grid and those kinds of things. But then I hear the Public Service Commission say publicly in hearings, well, the General Assembly hasn't yet told us that we are fully electrifying, and so therefore we're going to continue to support gas infrastructure. But then the Public Service Commission comes to us with a bill that is continuing to support public infrastructure and asking us to move that forward. So we end up in this cyclical process of the Public Service Commission saying, we haven't told you not to do it, and so you're going to keep doing it, and then coming and asking us to allow you to keep subsidizing the fossil gas infrastructure. Does that make sense?
Yes, Delegate, it does make the question. Thank you for the question. With all due respect, again, the stakeholders in this 40-plus group, I don't have the exact number, many participants. We're a quasi-judicial agency. The commission acts on the proceeding before us. The items where the parties agreed are, I believe, what are in this bill. Again, we defer to the legislature. If the we're providing information. If the legislature chooses to change that aspect of the law, that's fine. It's not in this bill because that was not one of the recommendations that came from that stakeholder work group. And so it wasn't included in there to change the existing law. So we're not coming forward asking to change the law to include gas, where it's the status quo, and there wasn't, that was not one of the recommendations from the work group to change it. And if we had opened that door, we would have had many things that many different stakeholders. So we're simply bringing this to the legislature. The commission is neutral on that. We will, as you mentioned, the commission has stated under the prior framework and the prior cycle, even before the CSNA language comes into effect, mentioned what the law would be, which is going to be different now under the CSNA. And so, yeah, Molly will add.
I just want to really note very quickly, one of the things that this bill specifically does is it defines beneficial electrification, and that then sets the framework for when things would and would not be considered beneficial. It lifts the definitions of greenhouse gas reductions from the environment article, opens the door for beneficial electrification. So while it does not specifically either codify or prohibit any offerings, the offerings would then run through the cost-benefit analysis that will be developed, and depending on how things score out, that will determine what is and isn't in the program, as it always has. And I just want to add one more item, which is that gas appliances will continue to have federal rebates available through 2031, and that'll be factored into whether or not that remains in the public interest.
And again,
looking at those offerings.
And that's a legislative decision if you want Maryland to be eligible for the next several years or not. We're not taking a position on that.
Yep. Right.
Okay,
So can I just ask one follow-up?
All right, very
Thank
quickly.
you. Sorry. So when you're saying that there wasn't consensus to remove subsidizing the fossil gas systems, there also wasn't consensus to keep them in. It just wasn't
Correct.
discussed or it wasn't agreed on. That was the status quo, and so there wasn't
Correct.
consensus to change it in any way. Is
Yes,
that, is
ma'am.
that right?
We erred on the side of status quo unless there was a consensus recommendation to make a change.
Gotcha.
And then
That's
the
helpful.
bill also opens as many doors as possible while maintaining the structure.
Got it. Thank
Yep,
you.
We'll have a chance to debate more on that after I present my version of the bill, right?
We can't wait.
Can't wait, that's right. Thank you. Maybe you should present that too. All right,
Yeah.
thank you, panel. Do we have any questions for this panel? If not, I'm going to call upon the next one. Thank you. All right, do we have favorable in person? Ann Kleiss, Josh McClellan, John Quinn, and let's see, Manuel Gerardo. And okay. Please go ahead when you're set.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is John Quinn with Baltimore Gas and Electric, here in strong support of House Bill 1035. Empower is a great program. It's realized really great benefits since 2007. At BG&E, we've delivered through Empower, the program, $7.7 billion in value and avoided 6 million megawatt hours of energy use. It's been a big success. We think the success should continue, and we realize that it has to be modernized, including adding greenhouse gas to the parameters. I think you've heard a little bit about this, but the development of this bill is important. The consensus process, which I'll come back to in a moment. But there are checks and balances in this, even though it allows companies to propose programs. They have to be evaluated by the Public Service Commission. Doesn't mean you get them. They're going to be evaluated based on the impact on rates, which is super critical, on the environment, on jobs, on greenhouse gases, and each one's going to go through that ringer. And those processes are pretty comprehensive. In addition, once we get them in, and after the PSC reviews, if they're approved, we have to report back our progress every 6 months. And this whole 3-year process has been in place and been very effective. In the end, the legislature should be happy that annually there's a report to the Maryland General Assembly on the progress and how we're doing. I want to go back to the transparent, inclusive, and comprehensive process that developed these things. This rule's based on the structure that was developed through that process. It's close to 2 years of a process. 78 attendees, 28 meetings, and we strongly think we should follow that consensus recommendation, and we strongly support a favorable outcome from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Manny Giraldo, the lobbyist for Washington Gas, and also serve as the State Government Relations Manager. We are in support of this bill. I'm also joined by Josh McClellan, Senior Manager of Energy Efficiency at Washington Gas, and I will yield my time and all questions to Josh.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the committee. Josh McClelland, Senior Manager of Energy Efficiency at Washington Gas. I'm here today to testify on behalf of the company in support of House Bill 1035. For almost 15 years, the Empower Maryland utility programs have saved Maryland residents and businesses hundreds of millions of dollars on their monthly electric and gas bills to help consumers lower their overall energy demand and provided resources to tens of thousands of underserved customers and communities. Equally important, the performance of Empower Maryland has resulted in substantial reductions in greenhouse gas emissions associated with energy consumption for both natural gas and electricity. With the company joining the Empower Maryland framework in 2015, Washington Gas has contributed to the overall success of Empower by serving over 400,000 customers and producing almost 100 million therms of life cycle energy savings. At the risk of stating the obvious, these reductions in energy consumption are equal to over 500,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide never making their way into our atmosphere. All this is to demonstrate that Empower Maryland is a successful and cost-effective method to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and has placed Maryland as one of the leading states in the nation in terms of delivering impactful energy efficiency programs. As Maryland moves towards achieving some of the more ambitious climate goals in the country, stakeholders, advocates, and concerned citizens from every corner of the state are coming together to find ways to drive deeper emissions and inform policy whenever possible. One such forum was the Empower Maryland Future Programming Work Group, which was comprised of dozens of stakeholders and tasked with modifying the current Empower structure to better align with the state's climate goals. As such, the work group convened for almost 2 years and submitted an extensive report and a potential study that was submitted to the Public Service Commission. And these are the main tenets why Washington Gas is in support of this bill. And to recap, it is a faithful representation of the countless hours devoted to analysis, deliberation, and consensus among the stakeholders. It builds upon the historical successes of Empower Maryland to reduce emissions effectively into the future. It acknowledges the value that
I'm going to need you to wrap up.
Yes, sir. That both electric and gas utilities can contribute towards reducing emissions and rightfully places more accountability upon them to do so. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Ann.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Ann Clays here on behalf of PEPCO and Delmarva Power in support of House Bill 1035. House Bill 1035 is the product of the Future Programming Work Group led by the Maryland Public Service Commission, which was established to make recommendations for the Maryland Empower program. As discussed already, PEPCO and Delmarva Power support House Bill 1035 because the provisions in the legislation include the consensus items agreed by the work group and members by the work group during the PSC-led process. Empower Maryland has programs with potential to provide cost-effective, long-term benefits, job creation, and improvements to the environment. Again, PEPCO and Delmarva Power support House Bill 1035 and respectfully ask for a favorable vote. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you so much. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. We will now go to favorable with amendments. I have Katie Nash and Peter Trufenstock. And you can start when ready.
You mind if I go first?
Please go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Katie Nash on behalf of Vistra with considerable more oxygen than I had last time. We are here favorable with amendments, and we have submitted written testimony, so I will be brief. In that testimony, we have specific language that we would like to include to see that suppliers are included in the work to offer energy efficiency programming. I've included in our testimony some specific examples that Vistra does. But the bill, I just want to highlight, the bill does contemplate that DHCD can procure or provide programs. And so right there you have ideas about how competition could benefit energy efficiency offering. We also included some additional language regarding additional data transparency. We feel that this would be important as well as utilities are tasked with additional responsibilities. This language that we provided could offer additional accountability. Out of respect for the committee's time, we didn't decide to testify on all the Empower bills, but the general concept remains the same. So Vistra urges a favorable with amendment report. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Carville Collins. I'm representing Columbia Gas of Maryland, serving some 33,000 natural gas customers in Maryland's 3 westernmost counties. We are here in support of House Bill 1035 with amendments. The goals of the legislation are reasonable and measured, and Columbia Gas is firmly committed to these goals. While supporting the intent of the bill, Columbia offers 3 minor amendments. The first 2 would afford first-time filers slightly more time, 3 months to be exact, to complete their first consultation and their first plan. We are a small gas utility. We have never prepared a plan previously, and we are requesting a little more time on just our first time through. Columbia proposes a 3rd amendment clarifying the importance of the overall cost effectiveness of a proposed plan. It is our considered view that these plans proposed to the Commission must be realistic and they must not adversely impact ratepayers. In other words, the cost of the plans to ratepayers under this legislation must not exceed the benefits to ratepayers. If costs exceed benefits, we submit this is not a good outcome for ratepayers. And further, it's an especially problematic and regressive outcome for low and middle income ratepayers. You have heard from the Commission just a moment ago about costs and that they need to be measured. We agree. Cost effectiveness is essential. And it's the main reason for our support for this bill with amendment, while Columbia is opposing the other Empower bill before you later today, House Bill 904, because that bill is silent on not only cost effectiveness, but any other criteria for these plans. Columbia has attached its amendments to its written testimony, and we urge a favorable report with amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Great job. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. We'll now turn to the unfavorable, as well as the one information witness. I have Emily Scarr, David Lapp, and Josh Tolkien, and Mr. Jim Gravatt. If you could come up, sir. I don't care the order of the first three. You can start when ready, but Mr. Gravatt, you will go last.
Hi, for the record, my name is Emily Scarr. I'm the director of Maryland PIRG here in respectful opposition to HB 1035. Maryland PIRG has worked on consumer issues for 50 years in Maryland, including helping pass the initial Empower Energy Efficiency Act. We don't often oppose bills, but we thought it was important to lay out our concerns. We're concerned that the proposed legislation fails to ensure necessary ratepayer protections and lacks sufficient details on how utilities plan to meet their greenhouse gas reduction goals. HB 1035 includes a provision that guarantees that the utilities profit on the program. Maryland utilities are already profiting significantly more on their energy efficiency programs than other top states for energy efficiency. Electric and gas companies making a profit on a successful energy efficiency program is not a bad thing, but those profits should be tied to results. And the same goes for them failing to meet their goals. That should impact their ability to profit. This bill will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it's unclear if those reductions will be through energy efficiency and to the maximum benefit of consumers. In an op-ed published yesterday from the PSC chair, he talks about using Empower funds to incentivize vehicle electrification. I love vehicle electrification, but I'm not convinced it's the best use of ratepayer dollars for a home energy efficiency program to be used for vehicle electrification. This is a clear example of why we need the General Assembly to set guidance to the PSC on how to provide these incentives. In addition, the bill leaves the door open for continued use of fossil fuel heating and appliance incentives. While we know some Maryland families will keep using gas-fired heating and appliances for the near term, with few exceptions, we don't believe ratepayer money should subsidize and incentivize their use, which is in direct opposition to the state's climate goals. HB 1035 also puts an end to the legislative goals for energy efficiency, and it turns it over to the PSC, taking away that process we think is dangerous. And finally, while we have heard that the bill is described as a consensus bill, we were concerned that this lowest common denominator approach is not the best way to craft policy. So we respectfully request an unfavorable report.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair and members of the committee. David Lapp for the Office of People's Counsel. With all due respect to the prior panels, I want to be clear that this is not a consensus bill. There was no consensus bill out of the Future Programming Work Group. There was consensus to replace the existing energy savings target in the law with a greenhouse gas target. And I can refer people to the folks in the report that shares that information. The consensus was not to do what this bill does, to eliminate any targets from state law and leave it to the PSC. So in that respect, HB 1035 walks back the state climate goals that were in the Climate Solutions Now Act. Second, HB 1035 changes in very significant ways how Empower is paid for to the detriment of customers. Ms. Scarr just referred to this. This was never discussed before the working group. Under current law, costs are recovered in the surcharge, not in base rates. Current law only authorizes, not requires, incentives. This goes to the shall word. The 1035 has shall. It says shall have incentives for the utilities. And further, it gives the option to the utility, apparently, of stating that the surcharge cost can be put in their base rates and it will earn at the authorized rate of return. The difference between expensing Empower costs and putting those costs in rate base means Empower costs for customers over the long term will be 2 to 4 times what the costs are today. This, you don't have to take my word for it. In a very recent order, December 29, 2022, the commission itself said that not expensing means, quote, a dramatic increase in rates, end quote. It further said that the utility proposal, quote, to embed the Empower program in base rates would eliminate the Maryland Empower surcharge line item on customer bills, effectively hiding the cost and presence of the program in distribution rates to the benefit of no one. For these and other reasons in our written testimony, we ask for an unfavorable report.
Thanks. Josh, go ahead.
Thank you very much, members of the committee. Can you all hear me? Great, I'm going.
Yep, nope, you're good.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Josh Tolkien with the Maryland Sierra Club. Sorry I can only be here virtually. Fortunately, I finally got my dose of COVID. I'm going to make 3 points that have not been made before. First is Empower Maryland goals have always been set by the General Assembly. Since the policy was passed in 2008, I was there from the updates and the teens. I was there. It is a policy decision the General Assembly has been leading, and that's critical because it gives the proper confines for the Public Service Commission to then do the rest of the cost-benefit analysis and ratepayer protection work that they need to be doing. But without any clear goals, the program is really rudderless. Number two, on consensus. Yeah, being in a process for 2 years, it was a lovely process, but there were a lot of different ideas coming from a lot of different players. The presumption that a process that includes the Sierra Club, the utilities, MEA, and OPC should reach consensus on all important items is not realistic, and it might flag a problem with the process that makes us sort of weary about sending more items back into this process. It's been 2 years and there's no, if the PSC says there's no financial analysis, I think it's worth looking at whether or not the process is working. Lastly, it should be noted that the details are critical. Behind the meter, the goals for the program. In our recent experience, several proposals have been brought to the Public Service Commission to make programmatic changes, such as phasing out subsidies from fossil fuels. And the commission actually wrote back and said, because the current legislation doesn't ban gas, then it means that there's no reason these should be removed from the Empower program. So they've already basically said what they will be doing with the future Empower program. So being more specific in legislation than this legislation is definitely worth it from an advocate perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. And Mr. Ravak, go ahead. And for the record, so everybody knows you are information.
Indeed, thank you. My name is Jim Gravatt, for the record. I'm a consultant with Energy Futures Group and am here on behalf of the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates. I've supported the advocates for, if Ms. Knoll has been in power for 10 years, then I've probably been doing it for 12 or 13. And I work in a lot of states, and I just want to bring some perspective on what I see from commissions and proceedings in those other states. And as a participant, someone who sat through the 25 to 30 meetings of the Future Programming Work Group. And this has been said a number of times, but since it was said by the first panel, I feel I also need to say this bill that we're discussing is not a consensus product. I certainly was not informed that there was going to be a bill, much less what it contained. And importantly, what I want to talk about from the perspective of other states is that when legislatures set goals, utilities achieve greater levels of savings. This was studied by the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. They found in 2017 that states that have statutory savings goals save on average 4 times as much energy as states that do not have statutory savings goals. I think that's pretty compelling. And Ms. Knoll said it was tried to retain status quo where there wasn't a consensus, but it's not status quo for the commission to set goals. It hasn't been since before 2008. I also just observe in the bill that I would be concerned about how broad it is, what can be included towards the savings, because I think that that risks actually some shortcomings in terms of consumer protections, because there's no assurance that what ratepayers pay for is going to provide direct benefits back to them. And when we talk about vehicle electrification, for example, when we talk about grid improvements that may save energy and be useful, but it doesn't really help customers save money on their bills. And we're talking a lot about the high cost of energy and energy burden. I think that Empower traditionally has focused on those benefits and would be I would consider it successful if it continued to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Delegate Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. David, is removing gas something that the PSC work group agreed upon? Was there consensus there?
No, there was no consensus on that.
Thank you.
Oh, Delegate Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Question for the panel. Has the utilities failed to meet the goals under the current Empower program? And why is there fear that they won't perform under the new program? Whoever.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
You can't hear me? Has the utilities failed to meet the goals under the current Empower program?
The utilities have not, they have achieved goals. They have not spent the authorized money, so spending is short of what's been authorized. So we think that more can be achieved under Empower.
If I could jump in, there's also different ways to reach the goal. You can reach the goal through helping ratepayers save money, or you can reach the goal sometimes through this creative, it's known as front of the meter process, where you do voltage changes along the electrical line, which may reduce greenhouse gases, though the proper studying has not been done to verify precisely how, but doesn't save ratepayers money. So I think many of us feel that while a goal may have been met for reducing electricity usage, the overarching goal of maximizing ratepayer savings has not been met, and that is why there's other changes proposed in the other legislation.
Well, can I follow up? Why is there fear that they won't meet the new goals?
Well, I don't have a fear that they wouldn't meet the new goal.
Well, I think one of the concerns here is that we don't know what the goals are if this statute passes. That the commission will eventually set new goals, but we don't know where they'll be and how they'll match with goals in existing law for energy savings. And, whether those goals are sufficient to help the state meet its climate goals. We need Empower to just play a small role in that. Ratepayers should not be funding all those initiatives that are required for buildings to meet the to meet the climate goals, the greenhouse gas reduction goals. But I think we are confident that the utilities will meet what's required.
The only time the utilities have failed is when the program first.
We got.
That's fine.
You got your answer?
Yeah, we're good.
Delegate Adams.
So David, let me ask you this. Does the Office of People's Counsel think that the ratepayers should be paying more for Empower?
We have I guess our position is more nuanced than that. We can.
I'm not a very nuanced guy. I'm pretty straight line.
We look at, where the utilities are spending their money. They're spending money at, our biggest gas utility is spending just on capital infrastructure close to $500 million a year. And we do think that Empower and energy savings and the goals, the objectives of the Empower program are beneficial. We think more money should be directed toward low-income programs. We'll probably talk about that in a few minutes. I hope that answers your question.
It does. So, Chair, do you have another question? Do you have cost estimates for the targets in this piece of legislation?
Well, there are no targets in this legislation. I think the fiscal note, the PSC acknowledges that they can't estimate any costs associated with this.
Is there
bill?
Can you editorialize why they can't do that?
I can tell you that for HB 904, which is coming up, we did technical analysis and we came up with a number that we think matches as close as you can, because there's not an easy way to translate energy savings into greenhouse gas reductions, but there are ways to do it, and we have done that. And that percentage, 1.8% a year, is what's in HB 904. So we think it can be done, and we did it, and we think that's in the bill. And so we think that's a minimum target. We have identified vastly greater savings that can occur, especially through electrification in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. But we are concerned about the cost, which is why we went no further in estimating what those greenhouse gas reduction targets should be for HB 904 than 1.8%, because we think we tried to be faithful to what exists in existing law under the Climate Solutions Now Act for energy savings.
Delegate Aaron's.
We're talking about, how much debt is there out there on the Empower debt? How much do they carry?
There's, from the early stages of Empower, there exists about an $800 million, what we call the unamortized balance.
Okay.
That the commission has recently required the utilities to make filings to eliminate that balance. We've been urging the action on that balance for quite some time because it is costly for ratepayers to carry that balance. So there is now, we're working on plans, we're making filings about eliminating that balance and moving to an all-expensing model. The language that I referred to in my testimony earlier would walk that back. And I quoted from recent commission language in an order explaining why it's important to move to an expensing model. The other thing that expensing does is it keeps the overall program costs much lower. And it serves as sort of a cap, because we know expensing, that means that all the costs are recovered in the current year and the utilities don't earn at their authorized rate of return for expenses. And so that serves to keep the overall cost lower. By allowing them to put it in rate base, it means a smaller amount comes into rates that year, but in the long term it costs multiples more.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Frazier Hidalgo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wasn't planning on asking a question, David, but then you just mentioned something about cost savings. And I wanted to expand on that a little bit. When you're talking about cost savings and you're measuring burning fossil fuels versus electricity, using electricity, and you're trying to figure out what the total costs are, I haven't heard anybody, is there any connection in the total cost savings, I know maybe not directly in this program, for the link between public health costs and total costs of burning fossil fuels compared to electricity? Because I want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples here.
Yes, I mean, and that's been a subject of before the Future Planning Working Group in terms of how to incorporate health and other, if a cleaner home as a result of Empower program spending is a benefit to society. It's difficult to calculate those costs, but there are efforts underway to make that happen because it's important.
If there was a way to quantify that, I would be very interested in trying to get some, at least maybe not rock hard numbers, but some soft numbers so that we can, compare apples to apples a little bit more than we currently do.
We certainly can follow up.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, that concludes this bill hearing. Next, we will go to House Bill 169, Delegate Charkoudian. Yep, go ahead. Start when ready.
Well, I think we got Stacy and, come join me. Sure. Right. Mr. Chair, colleagues, for the record, Delegate Lori Charkoudian asking for a favorable report on House Bill 169. And I think I'm sandwiched by two really important bills that we have to make some decisions about this year. I hope that the bill in front of you is an easy decision because we actually have passed this bill.
1 second, Delegate. You guys can just take a seat and then we'll get you up here, I promise. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's okay. That's okay. I get to say it again. We've passed this bill already. We passed this bill last year. and the governor vetoed it. So here we are back again. And here's the deal. Whatever we decide to do with the broader Empower program, we have a significant problem, and the problem is an equity problem within Empower. You heard me mention earlier that since 2016, several of the people who are here with me and other advocates have been asking the Public Service Commission to set a goal to make sure that low-income people, the people who struggle the most to pay their energy bills, get their fair share of the Empower money. Now, let me put this in a little bit of context for you. We have actually a nationally recognized Empower program right now measuring energy efficiency, increasing at 2% per year. It's actually pretty good for everybody. But when we pull out the low-income portion of that, low-income households increase their energy efficiency at 0.1% per year, 0.04% per year, 0.2% per year. And it changes over the years, but it has never gotten above 0.4. That was the highest it ever got, and usually it hovers closer to 0.1 and 0.2. And as far as I'm concerned, that is unethical and it's immoral. We cannot have a system where low-income people are paying into Empower and subsidizing higher-income people to make their homes more efficient. Right now, low-income people, the people that are affected by this bill below 250% of federal poverty level, pay about $50 million of Empower every year for the last 6 years into the system and get back $28 million in benefits. So that is, out of the low-income households, $22 million each year that is going to subsidize higher-income folks. Now, there's a number of reasons that this is happening. It's also happening, by the way, it's also happening at a time when, over the last several years, the utilities have underspent their portion of Empower that's been collected at about $25 million. So literally, low-income people are paying in, that $22 million is sitting there, nobody's benefiting from it. Higher-income people are increasing their household efficiency, and lower-income people are suffering and struggling to pay their energy bills and suffering from all the health outcomes that are associated with having an inefficient home and an unhealthy home. Now, the reason for this is a little bit complicated. The General Assembly, I think, made a good decision years ago to put the low-income Empower program in the Department of Housing and Community Development. And that was a good decision because DHCD also has access to a lot of federal money for low-income energy efficiency, and that federal money that DHCD has access to has actually increased substantially with the passage of the IIJA and soon the IRA, where the money can go to MEA and can be put in the DHCD pot. There's also other money that DHCD has access to or could have access to if they choose to go forward, or what this bill will require that they go forward with whole home retrofits. But part of the problem is that a lot of low-income housing has so many challenges with it that if somebody tries to get access to energy efficiency programming, to weatherization, they sign up and someone comes and they look at their home and they say, yeah, you're probably spending too much on your energy bill, but because you also have mold, we cannot weatherize your home. So here's some light bulbs and good luck. And that household loses out on everything that could benefit them. And so what this bill does is a couple of things. First of all, it sets standards. We have never had a standard. We as a legislature have never said our commitment to equity and how we invest in low-income energy efficiency is important enough that we're going to set standards. I'm sorry, we did say that. We said that last year. So we said that last year, the governor vetoed it. So now we're going to say it again. That's really important. The second thing that's important that this bill does is that it requires that DHC manage this with a whole home retrofit approach. So if you walk into that house, and right now, normally you'd walk out saying you got mold, you got to call these people for the mold problem, here's some light bulbs. Now DHCD would have to say, if we pass this bill, you got mold, let's get the mold money in here. We got money to help with mold, let's get the mold folks in here, and then let's weatherize your home. Let's actually solve all these problems together, because they're interrelated. Their energy efficiency and green, healthy homes are interrelated, and we have a chance to fix them all together. The third thing that this bill does, and it's just really good timing, we're very lucky that we have a federal government willing to invest as much as they are willing to invest. And what this bill does is it says there's all these different funding sources. So while we do need some ratepayer funding, there's all these other funding sources, and so we're going to give DHCD credit for the work that they do combining, and we're going to tell them to combine the funding sources, and we're going to give them credit for the work that they do combining all these funding sources. So there's the Empower funding source, and then there's all these other funding sources. You pull them together, do whole home retrofits, and let's really build equity into this system. I have folks here who I think can talk more about how they've been affected by this and some of the other processes. And I am happy to take questions after we hear from the panel. Thank you. Do you want to go next?
Okay. Hi, good afternoon. For the record, my name is Stacy Hartwell. I'm the Chair of Environmental and Climate Justice for the NAACP Maryland State Conference. I am writing on behalf, or I'm here, excuse me, on behalf of the Maryland State Conference in support of House Bill 0169. Energy efficiency is an energy justice issue. The legacy of racist housing policies and financial lending practices have negatively impacted housing quality in Black and brown communities, creating energy issues that run the gamut from bad insulation, outdated heating and air conditioning, advanced aged appliances, and building envelope failures. These conditions lead to a disproportionate burden of energy insecurity as well as health issues. The issues or the issue plagues our communities, yet we share this burden with Hispanic households, Native Americans, senior citizens on fixed incomes, renters, and low-income multifamily building residents. To put this issue in numbers, a household's energy burden is a percentage of income spent on energy bills. A high energy burden is considered to be above 6%. In Baltimore, almost a quarter of low-income households have an energy burden of 22%. That means for every $100 a family brings in, 22 of those dollars are unwaveringly committed to basic heating and cooling needs. Energy efficiency is the low-hanging fruit in energy policy. Using energy more efficiently is one of the fastest, most cost-effective ways to lower utility bills and stabilize electricity prices for vulnerable houses. For these reasons, we request a favorable report on House Bill 0169. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Ruth Ann Norton, President and CEO of the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative and an advisor to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Energy on the work to align, braid, and coordinate resources with health and safety with energy efficiency. What we know is that this incredibly unacceptable gap in equity of the investment of low-income families of $50 million a year with the return of services of 28 leads to a number of things that are well documented. Number one, housing instability. By investing in energy efficiency for this sector, we will improve and reduce housing turnover and instability by 36%. What we also know is that we will reduce hospitalizations for asthma, respiratory disease, COPD, by 66%. We improve not only that, but cardiac care and neurological care for our older adults who suffer from extreme heat and extreme cold as a result of this. Across the state of Maryland, low-income families pay 13%, taking the 22% from Baltimore, but in rural and urban communities, compared to 2% for the rest of us in moderate and upper income families. We need to ensure that we align our goals with equity, with our goals with energy, and our goals with health. By doing so, we will reduce significantly our cost in Medicaid, our cost in Medicare, and we will improve another key element, intergenerational wealth transfer. There is an 8-to-1 gap in African-American families in the state of Maryland on intergenerational wealth transfer through real estate. By improving energy efficiency, we improve that equity.
Thank you, ma'am. Delegate, I know everyone in the gallery is on your panel. Do you want to play musical chairs so that other people who are back there want to come up?
Only half of them,
be more
Mr.
efficient?
Chair, yeah.
Okay. With that, either one of the next two panel members can begin to brief.
Thank you.
Good morning, Vice and all assembled. My name is Aurelia Maven hyphenated Valentine. I cannot stress how important this bill for energy low income, because I receive $2,000 a month. I'm retired 7 years ago. Revitalization and Green came into my home and took 7 rooms and got let out my home. I could not do that myself with my low income. they took and put new pipes in my house, put new flooring in, put new a heater, a new water tank in. These things could not have been done without the people helping us now, low income. And I really appreciate everything they have done for us. I cannot stress, because so many people getting fired, laid off, leaving their houses, their homes, don't have money. And I just been one affectionate one that I'm still striving and doing, going through the hardship that I'm going through still, even when I'm late, not working no more. And I just want to say, for all that you've done for me, for all that you've done for me, the least I can do is to take thanks to you for all you done, for all you done, for all you done for me. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Follow that.
Thank you. Yes, that is very difficult to follow up on. That was beautiful. Good afternoon again. David Lapp here for the Office of People's Counsel. I'm not going to repeat some of the great things about this bill and why it's necessary. It is necessary to rectify the historical and ongoing disparities in the Empower program. I want to just hit upon the point that we are now undergoing a major transition in our energy sector and how residential customers receive energy. We have seen since 2010 electrification gradually eating into market share of gas utilities, and we see gas utility rates rising and going to rise in the future. Low-income customers are at the biggest risk of what's going on right now, and this bill is one small but very, very important part to remedy the existing disparities in the program. The other point I want to make is that we are somewhat confounded by the fiscal note attached to this bill. There are many means of funding these programs from this bill to fund this bill outside of customer rates. Someone on my staff prepared for me 3 pages of different funding. It includes various federal funding, it includes IRA programs. There is a lot of money out there to fund these programs that doesn't have to come from customer rates. In any event, the disparity is something that is very troubling under existing public utility law. We don't like to have customers paying for things that they aren't receiving benefits for. So we ask for a favorable report. This is a critical bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the Economic Matters Committee. I'm Darren Lovas. I work with the Natural Resources Defense Council, where I'm a senior policy advisor. I'm also a proud resident of Maryland. And I am going to go through some of the history at the risk of rehashing what you've heard already. So the program was enacted, Empower was enacted in 2008, and at that time a lot of people said it'd be too costly and not feasible. But over the past 15 years, we've seen that's not the case. The program is highly effective, having met its established goal every cycle. The American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy estimated that between 2017 and 2026, Empower will reduce electric consumption by more than 130 billion kilowatt hours and generate $11.7 billion in energy savings for Maryland families and businesses. Unfortunately, while it has delivered diffuse energy efficiency benefits over the last 15 years, those benefits have not been distributed equally. For example, while the rest of the Empower portfolio invested more than $2.2 billion in energy efficiency over the decade from 2012 through 2021, low-income homes received less than 1/10 that amount. And Cadmus Consulting found that in the current program cycle, 21 through 23, while low-income customers pay $146 million in surcharges, they get just $85 million in DHCD investments. And the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates found that in every utility service area, low-income residential energy savings in the 2018 through 2020 program cycle were less than 2% of total portfolio savings. So this is a huge program design flaw because burdens are also inequitably distributed. Experts estimate that an affordable energy bill for a household should be no more than 6% of its income. but the average for low-income Marylanders is twice that, according to the latest market characterization study commissioned by OPC. And in some jurisdictions, it's higher than that. So Empower Maryland, as written now, is unjust, and it's getting worse. It's had 3 chapters so far. First, the 15% by 2015 goal, check. Then we accelerated savings to 2% per year, check. Now with the Climate Solutions Now Act, we'll hit 2.5% per year. That's great, unless you're low income.
Sir, I'm going to need you to wrap up.
Absolutely. The point is that performance goals work. They've worked since the program was launched. But DHCD has no goal driving energy efficiency services to those who need it most.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, members of the committee, for the chance to add to this hearing. My name is Justin Berry. I work at the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative as a research and policy analyst. I want to take my time briefly here to speak, adding to the details and sharing some of the numbers related to the funding available to help support this, others have alluded to. First, regarding the fiscal note, we're confident that the DHCD programs and others should be able to achieve economies of scale to help bring this cost overall down, which doesn't seem to be reflected in the estimate. And then, as others have spoken to, there are significant funds available. First, as was referenced in the previous hearing, the Empower program currently is underspending the authorized amount. There's money left in that program that can be used, especially if the unamortized debt is dealt with to reduce the cost. That's about $25 million per year in previous years that's been underspent. Second, with the federal funding, the Inflation Reduction Act has $137 million in rebates going to Maryland over the next 10 years for both efficiency and electrification. It also creates a $27 billion greenhouse gas reduction fund, $7 billion available to go to state and local governments directly for grants on clean energy technologies that could support this program, and another $8 billion that's meant for low income and moderate income clients as well. So it's a ton of money that the federal government is putting here. In addition, directly applicable to this program because of how Delegate Charkoudian has crafted this bill, we have $45 million in additional weatherization funds coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law to Maryland in the next 5 years as well. So especially when we consider that the efforts to align the Empower program with the greenhouse gas goals of the state and the opportunity to drive electrification in low-income homes, this is a great opportunity to really invest in the areas that matter the most. Thank you for your favorable report and appreciate the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Delegate Pippy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel. One thing that I heard is in reference to the fiscal note, and sometimes the fiscal notes are not 100% accurate, but there is some other testimony here that I just want to maybe get your input from. So the director of the Maryland Energy Administration, Paul Pinsky, I'm looking at his bio here, he served in the Senate a long time, has essentially received every award imaginable from Climate Change and Climate Action Network and Chesapeake Bay Foundation. He is, I would say, in line with what you're trying to do here. But he writes in this letter to this committee, he says, the Maryland Energy Administration strongly supports programmatic efforts that seek to assist Maryland's most vulnerable ratepayers. However, the committee should be aware that this bill may exacerbate a significant debt that will ultimately be borne by ratepayers, and that certain aspects of the bill do not align with evolving state goals. So if one of you would like to address that. Thank you.
Let me address the second one first, because that's a very easy answer, and the other one's I'm gonna go through all the funding sources, so wait for that. So the first one is an easy answer, which is when there is a line in this bill that directs I could find it for you, but it directs when Empower goals change from energy efficiency to greenhouse gas reduction, which they're likely to, then these goals would change as well. They would be greenhouse gas reduction as opposed to energy efficiency. Most of what the bill does is directs DHCD on how to do it, and so it doesn't matter that you're basically doing very similar things, except you're doing more electrification with greenhouse gas goals. So that's the vast majority of the bill wouldn't change. For a while, we were working on tightening up those amendments, but we wanted to see first if either of those other bills pass. And so what we were going to do instead is move this bill, and the Senate has started moving this bill, and then amend those other bills, whichever one of those two passes, right? So it's a relatively straightforward fix to go from energy efficiency to greenhouse gas because the activities that DHCD is doing are the same. In terms of the question about ratepayer impact, I do want to come back to say, like, do we think it's okay for low-income ratepayers to subsidize higher-income ratepayers? We passed a bill last year to increase further to 2.5% what average ratepayers are receiving. It was Senator Pinsky's bill, and I supported it. But we need to say that we are willing to invest in low-income ratepayers regardless. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I actually asked them about the math that they did. I reached out because I didn't think the math was right based on everything that you heard of everybody here talking about 3 and 4 pages of funding sources. And so if you look at the bill itself, you'll actually see a list on, the bill itself lists a bunch of the funding sources starting on page 7. The plan shall coordinate funding among, I won't read the whole list for you. And I asked, did you incorporate these into that number? And DHCD and MEA said no. So basically, they sort of did the math. Now, there's people who believe that if they do the program more efficiently and get economies of scale, it won't cost that much. But even if we assume it costs what they say it would cost, that fiscal note doesn't take into account, or that number they're floating doesn't take into account all of these funding sources, nor does it take into account all the federal funding, IIJA, IRA money, and additional block grants, and additional competitive money that could become available if we were running a program that could be nationally recognized. You'll note in the actual fiscal note, if you read the whole fiscal note, you'll note that the fiscal note writers actually reference that. They say, we're not sure if these, are the numbers are, like it will be very expensive, but also there's other funding sources that the bill mentions, and that there are federal funding sources as well. So the math isn't quite right, I guess, for what the bill actually does.
So are we going to get an updated letter from the Director of the Energy Administration?
I mean, we can ask for one.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Howard.
There was talk about grants. So is that where some of the secondary funding would come from, in the form of grants? I'm digesting the bill now, and I know you have it broken down into the bill, but I guess my larger point would be that grants are temporary,
No,
like administrations and like investments that we talked about earlier. They're temporary.
So if you look on page 7, the list of the programs that are here have been around for decades. They're block grants to the state. The IRA and IIJA are 10 years worth of funding, both block grants to the state, which are guaranteed block grants to the state, as well as competitive funding that will be available over 10 years.
We've secured this funding.
The block grants, by definition, is secured. It's coming here. The competitive funding, we would have to apply for. That would be above and beyond.
Which could become available.
So the vast majority of the money in the math that I'm describing is money that is block grants.
That's what I'm getting at, yeah.
Is block grant money. There's money that's coming to the state regardless. And there could be additional money. But we could just focus on the money that's guaranteed to the state, and you'd be covering the vast majority of this.
I will say that I believe the Department of Housing and Community Development does intend in having conversations with them to pursue a number of the competitive grants for which they already qualify, and for which entities like Baltimore City, for example, have consistently held for over 25 years. So once in the cycle can retain such as the health-based housing and lead hazard control. But the state of Maryland is in a very good position, especially in alignment with this, because the Department of Energy and EPA are encouraging in their notice of funds availability for the alignment of funding between energy efficiency and health and safety, because it is well recognized that you must have the alignment of those two for a long-term sustainability. And the state is really in a very prime position on a number of these. And it will have, if you take the numbers of 100 to 125 million that they can bring in through this process, that we start to change entirely that fiscal note. but we're eligible for funds under the greenhouse gas emissions. We're eligible for funds under the Department of Energy Innovation grants. We're eligible under the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Lead and Healthy Homes Initiative
Eligible
and
but
home repair.
unsecured. We haven't secured that.
We are,
We're eligible.
yes, but we are in the high likelihood
Right.
to do that. I think the state recognizes that. State has not pursued, some of these are new and will be in place for many years, making a substantial progress on the issue that we bring
These are
before
new
you.
and these are going to be in place for many years based on what? How do you know that?
Based on the
Federal
way,
law.
Inflation Reduction Act, Bipartisan Infrastructure Act are 10-year out funding on many of these, in addition to the tax credits and rebates that will come and be eligible to be laid into this. And when you lay that out substantially, you are really knocking down the cost, and that's balanced against about $150 million of an equity deficit created by this investment and underspend back to the low-income communities across the state.
I'll just say this. We got a briefing about the Inflation Reduction Act, and I appreciate it, but it didn't inspire a lot of confidence in me because as far as like tax incentives to buy electric vehicles, there wasn't even e-bikes or motorcycles included in that. I put that bill in. I put it in late. And and I know that's a smaller point to make, but a lot of this is based on new funding that hasn't been secured, and we'll talk offline.
Ma'am, we can debate this later. Delegate Harrison.
Thank you. My question is actually pretty simple. It's pretty much yes and no type of questions. So Delegate Charkoudian. So I may have missed right in the beginning. This was a bill that we passed last year. It made it through both chambers.
Correct.
And it went to the governor. Is there anything different in this bill than last year?
The only difference is
So there's an amendment, something that's
just
different.
the line that will allow it to align with the greenhouse gas. There's a line that basically sets it up to align with any changes to Empower. That's the only difference.
So a little different, which is why we needed to have so much more discussion about it. My point
We
is.
have new people.
My point is. Okay.
Go ahead. No.
No, I understand that, but it passed both chambers.
I agree.
It passed when Senator Penske, the Energy Secretary was the senator at the time and went through his committee. It passed there. I guess I'm just a little confused why we're having such a robust discussion about something that we've already done. And so, isn't that so?
It's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Harrison, for that fantastic point. We've all been wondering. Delegate Aarons.
I have a question that you keep referencing that the people are living off the poor ratepayers. Somehow you keep mentioning
Living off the poor is not the word I use. It's the lower income people subsidizing the average, yeah. Mhm.
Lower income people, most of the bills we face in here, we always see a component of these bills and all our energy bills to maintain and take care of the lower income families, okay? So I'm kind of confused on how, if the people that are paying their rates, they're not the lower income families, I would assume that the lower income families aren't the vast majority of rate dollars that we get. Is that a correct assumption?
So within Empower.
Okay, well,
I have the numbers. I have the numbers and they're here. I can give them to you. So within Empower, people who earn roughly, the estimates are people who earn below 250% pay in about $50 million a year.
Okay, what do the people making more than that pay in?
And the rest of it is close to 200 million, I think.
Okay, I think when I listen to that,
right?
somehow we're all paying those rates. They pay 50, the lower income pay 50, the rest pay 200. And somehow you're trying to say that the people that are paying the 200 are benefiting from the people paying the 50.
Right, because the low-income people receive 28 million in benefits. So they pay in 50, they receive 28 million
so this is
benefits, yes.
benefits. So the people who are paying rates are actually helping pay that too. So I don't know if your statement's really correct on this.
No, it's correct. Wait, say that again?
They're paying it, but we're subsidizing so much of it. Is that correct?
I'm not sure which we you're talking about.
Our bills, our legislation. Our legislation.
Let me what happens is that people who earn under 250,000 of 250% of federal poverty pay in 50 million into Empower every year.
Okay.
That same group receives back 28 million of Empower every year. So the rest of that 22 million is going into the pot that is for the general Empower that everybody has access to.
Okay, so you do that, and I understand some of that, but are you aware that we keep blaming some things? There's a lot of people paying into this. We're doing this, and I've never seen a rate decrease. I've not been in the presence where anybody's power rate has gone down because of anything we've done, other than go up because we keep inflating what we're trying to do by a little bit what I would consider misguided energy policies.
Well, I'll tell you when rates decrease. Rates decrease when we help people implement energy efficiency in their homes. That's when people see rate decreases.
Well, I would say the rate may go down, but the cost hasn't gone down because we've increased the rates, but you're talking percentages now. You may be decreasing the use, and you're not decreasing the rate. Maybe their payment because they maybe used it less because it didn't require it.
Delegate, I'm just going to jump in here. This sounds like a debate. We'll have a debate on the floor. Delegate Adams.
So in the fiscal note, the state fiscal effect, DHCD's estimate of the cost associated with significantly expanding its Empower program to meet the bill's energy saving requirements is approximately $39.8 million in fiscal 24, increasing to $214 million by 2028. So I guess my question is this incremental above the existing block grants?
That is their rate of what they believe to be the total cost. And all of these grants would cut into that cost. Is that what you're asking?
That was my question.
Yeah. Substantial. Is that, did I get your question? So that's the total cost, the grants paid for.
I think I got what I'm, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Short questions too. Delegate Weibel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last bill, we heard that some of the Empower money wasn't spent. It was collected, not spent.
Yep.
Your assumption is that the low income are subsidizing the non-low income. Isn't it possible that some of that money is unspent and rather than subsidizing other ratepayers?
Yeah, it could just be sitting there, which also seems like a shame to me that we have 150 million from the last 6 years sitting there when people are struggling to pay their bills.
Okay, thank you.
We should all take lessons off Delegate Weibel on how to ask questions. Okay, well, that concludes this panel. Next, we will go to Zafar Shah, Garrett Fitzgerald, Emily Scar, and Lucy LaFlame. And you can start when ready.
Yes, good afternoon, Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Zafar Shah. For the record, I'm the Assistant Director of Advocacy for the Access to Counsel and Evictions work at Maryland Legal Aid. Maryland Legal Aid provides legal advice and representation to thousands of households across the state in our 12 offices every year. In my capacity, overseeing access to counsel and evictions, which was legislated by this body in 2021. I know that this is an important bill to our clients, and I don't want to belabor many of the very great points that were made already, but I do want to just add our client perspective that whether it's in eviction cases or cases to compel necessary repairs in a substandard property, top of mind for our clients is that, you know, the windows are drafty, the appliances don't work, they are cold or they are hot. They are not seeing the benefits of energy efficiency, and they know that this is a policy needed for poverty alleviation in the state of Maryland. Just focusing on low-income renters in the state, the average energy burden is 12%. So it's categorically a severe energy burden. This bill involves components which are specific to these households. The bill requires that DHCD adopt regulations that ensure the financial benefit of weatherization assistance will accrue primarily to tenants in the assisted rental property. It involves or includes tenant protections to prevent rent gouging or eviction as a consequence of weatherization. These are important and necessary for our clients, and we urge your favorable report on this bill.
Madam Chair, my name is Emily Scar. I'm the Director of Maryland PIRG here in support of HB 169. You'll see that a number of organizations have signed on to our written testimony. We thank all the legislators who voted in support of this legislation in 2022. I wanted to highlight a few findings from a recent report that the Maryland PIRG Foundation put out on the Empower Maryland program, which put a finer point on why this bill is so urgently needed. According to the Public Service Commission in 2021, the limited income program achieved only 9% of its energy savings target for limited income multifamily residences and only 70% of its limited income single-family homes goal. Previous speakers have made clear the historic spending disparity under Empower, so I won't belabor that point, but there is plenty more data in my testimony and our report if you want to take a look. And between the inception of Empower and 2021, the limited income Empower programs have served fewer than 50,000 households. The recent estimates count nearly 590,000 limited income households in the state. At its current rate of implementation, Empower would take between 130 and 150 years to serve all of those households. This bill creates goal setting, planning, and reporting are some of the top recommendations of our report, and the bill implements them. So we strongly urge a favorable report. I'd say that in addition to the benefits of energy efficiency, it's just a win-win. It lowers energy bills, reduces harmful pollution from greenhouse gases inside the home and from generation. So again, we urge a favorable report.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Garrett Fitzgerald. I'm here representing Montgomery County, where I serve as State Climate and Energy Policy Manager. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of in support of House Bill 169. This bill was a really good idea last year. It continues to be a really good idea this year. The committee has our written testimony, and you've already heard a lot about some of the issues that we're very concerned about, including how high energy costs represent a very high percentage of income for many households in our state, and how low-income families in aggregate are paying far more into Empower each year than they are receiving in benefits. It is absolutely time to establish clear goals and accountability to ensure that these households are more equitably benefiting from these programs. We think the ramp up to the 1% savings goal and other details in the bill are quite reasonable, and frankly, this one should be easy. So beyond this bill, we hope this won't be the last time we talk about more equitable ways to approach how we manage and pay for the energy we use in our homes. We would love to see further exploration of ideas to lower energy burdens, such as discounted utility rates or surcharge avoidance for low to moderate income families. We also, in the years ahead, hope that the state will scale up investment in building energy upgrades, which we think will be necessary to achieve our climate goals. And we hope to be able to have a conversation at that time about how to pay for those programs in more equitable ways, such as using taxpayer rather than ratepayer dollars, which is, of course, is a more regressive form of revenue. We think this is very important. For now, this legislation is an important starting point. It's long overdue. It has our full support, and we request a favorable review from this committee. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel on the bill hearing. Next, we will turn to House Bill 904, Delegate Chi. And Delegate, your panel is Emily Scar, Jim Gravatt, David Lapp, and Ruth Ann Norton. You all can come up. Ms. Scar, can I have you move one over?
Sure.
There you go.
Ruth Ann needed to step out. May I take her place as a member of her organization?
Are you signed up, sir?
Yeah, I should be. Justin Berry.
You are. Go ahead. All right. Go ahead, Delegate, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Delegate Lily Chi, it's great to be back in front of you, colleagues of Economic Matters Committee. I have two bills today. HB 904, it will sound very similar to what you have been listening to or hearing this afternoon because it's related to the Empower program. HB 904, which is the Empower Reform, or also called the Energy Savings Act. HB 904 transitions the Empower Maryland program from one that focuses on energy efficiency to one that focuses on greenhouse gas emissions reduction while also promoting energy and cost savings and other health and societal benefits. This is what we should call Empower 2.0, Post-Climate Solutions Act now. Let me start by saying, because of the debate you have heard earlier this afternoon, let me start by saying that we are aligned with the Public Service Commission in terms of this shared goal that it's time for the Empower program to transition from simply saving energy and a cost to also helping the state achieve our climate goals, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So we are aligned on that. In fact, the letter you have in your package from PSC, it stated that the Commission agrees that the focus of future Empower programs should be to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So where we differ is how to get there. This legislation is in response to PSC's need for additional legislative direction to help implement the Empower portion of the Climate Solutions Now Act. It would make it easier for people to choose cleaner, healthier, and more affordable options for home energy use and switch from fuel to electricity. Empower, as we all would agree, is a successful program that has saved the Marylanders billions in utility bills over the past 15 years. But rather than just help people reduce energy costs and use, we need Empower to pivot and help consumers choose electricity over fossil fuels for their home energy needs. So this is where this legislation comes in. Specifically, it would align Empower with our climate goals by directing PSC to set a goal for each utility company to reach both annual and cumulative goals of GHG reduction and sets clear benchmarks for performance. And the second, it would eliminate current subsidies or incentives for gas, propane, and other GHG-emitting appliances, like furnaces, water heaters, and stoves. I want to make it clear that we are not banning the use of such appliances. We are simply stopping to subsidize them, if that is what we don't want to do. Third, it promotes and provides rebates, credits, and deductions, including the anticipated federal incentives for all electric appliances for the adoption of high-efficiency electric heating and cooking, etc. And finally, it also helps low-income households navigate all of the related federal and the state incentives and programs by setting up a community outreach program in the Department of Housing and Community Development, which administers this program. And that would include some multilingual outreach specialists. So this needed reform is not just to meet our climate goals. These are mutually reinforcing goals to advance the triple bottom line, which is climate, health, and savings, or what I like to call people, planet, and profits. Because beyond health and climate concerns, our gas appliances are also increasingly becoming unaffordable for many Marylanders. The Office of People's Counsel released a report just last fall projecting that over the next 12 years, utility gas prices will double or triple. So the timing for this bill is also ideal. There are billions of federal dollars in new funding available to help people transition to electricity and save energy costs. But these incentives all depend on electrification. So if Maryland does not reform the Empower program and be specific about how we can get there, then we'll be forcing people to choose between federal incentives and the state incentives and leave a lot of money on the table at the same time. So with that, I want to thank you and urge your favorable report and turn to my panel.
Thank you, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee, David Lapp for the Office of People's Counsel. Very happy to be here in support of HB 904. I want to comment first on the costs related to this and emphasize that the 1.8% target, which is in an amendment to the bill, that is something that we calculated with technical help, and it's to ensure that there is no greater customer impact than required under current law. And we've heard references to the fact that this bill may cost a lot, or somehow the protections are eliminated that are in current law. And I want to be clear that it doesn't change. This bill does not change how Empower programming is done. All Empower programming still has to be approved by the Commission. It has to undergo pass a cost effectiveness test, and it's evaluated for ratepayer impact. Again, this bill requires expensing as opposed to rate basing. I won't repeat that point from earlier. The second point I want to make is that this bill does not take away the Commission's discretion. The Commission still has a lot of discretion over most all of the important aspects of the Empower program. But what it does is provide guidance on important issues that have confounded progress in the working groups that you've heard discussed today and in Commission orders. One of the best examples of that is support for the bill would require fuel switching and ending gas appliance incentives under the program. Both of these are repeated recommendations from the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. They're referenced in the Climate Solution Now Act. Studies show that electrification is the path forward, but the Commission has chosen not to allow those within the Empower program or to require those. The Commission, this bill makes the necessary changes to require that to happen. We ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, my name is Emily Scarn. I'm the director of Maryland PIRG. We, along with consumer, public health, and environmental organizations, enthusiastically support HB 904. As the state makes the transition to align the Empower program with the climate goals, it remains urgently important that any adjustments to the program maintain its primary goal, to provide benefits to ratepayers. And I want to talk about the specific consumer protection guardrails in HB 904. The bill directs the Public Service Commission to create performance standards to tie utility profits on the program to performance. The utilities have hit their goals in recent years, but they have been consistently outperformed by other states, and they have often not used their full budgets, making clear that they could be doing more. As you heard me say on an earlier bill, Maryland utilities are profiting significantly more than utilities in other top states for energy efficiency. For example, Pepco earns returns equivalent to about 16% of its budget, while BG&E and Potomac Edison earn returns equivalent to over 20% of their annual budgets, as compared to efficiency administrators in Massachusetts, Vermont, and Rhode Island, which all earn returns equivalent to about 5% or less of their budgets. Utilities also earn a higher return on Empower spending than on their normal expenses. For example, the PSC set a 9.5% return for BG&E's cost to providing electrical services for the last 2 years. Making a small profit on Empower is not a bad thing, but it must be tied to results, and the same goes for failing to meet their goals. That should impact profits. The second main consumer protection in the bill is the provision that 85% of the energy savings target is reached by improvements behind the meter, which means inside the home. Insulation, building improvements, and efficient electric heating and appliances. Those will provide both immediate and long-term benefits to ratepayers. This is not a big shift, but it does need to be codified that ensure ratepayers are seeing the benefits. For those reasons and others, we respectfully request a favorable report.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee. It's great to be back testifying. Again, I'm Justin Berry, Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. As you heard from the wonderful Ms. Ballantyne earlier, part of what we do is direct service implementation work. So I wanted to speak a bit about this bill in regards to that. First point I wanted to make is highlighting, as OPC is described here and repeatedly raised, there are real significant risks with staying on the gas infrastructure in terms of potential cost increases, let alone health risks, et cetera. The manufacturer lifespan for a gas HVAC system is typically about 15 to 20 years. But we know many systems will stay in the home for longer than that because people don't replace their systems until they are at the point of failure. We need to ensure that this program is using the information that we have to make sure the program incentives and design are serving the client interests, aligning the guidance in the program. Second, related to the provisions of the bill on outreach and support, home electrification upgrades can be really challenging. Cost is a barrier to pretty much all Marylanders, or most at the very least. But especially when fuel switching, there's many technical barriers that a typical household might not foresee if they were just doing it on their own. A lot of homes will need electrical upgrades so their panels or breaker boxes are up to code for electrification. You need to create dedicated wires and breakers for major appliances like stoves and washers or water heaters. And homes that are disconnecting from gas need to work with a plumber to cap off their gas line, work with utilities to ensure the meters are moved, et cetera. And then weatherization is a whole nother layer, air sealing, insulation, that the role of a program is really important in making sure people are making the informed choices to have the structure and support around them. The outreach specialists, especially with multilingual support, will be a key to making sure we can do this equitably, especially as the program is serving more and more low-income clients, especially if we're able to pass other bills. I describe all this to highlight the benefits of having this in one of our key state programs. We strongly support this bill for many of the reasons described earlier, and respectfully urge a favorable report.
Good afternoon again. Jim Gravatt, Energy Futures Group, on behalf of the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates to provide information on this bill. And I'll try not to repeat what others have said, but as I said in an earlier hearing this afternoon, studies have shown that in jurisdictions where statutory energy efficiency goals are enacted, they on average achieve 4 times the level of energy savings of jurisdictions that do not have such goals. So for that reason alone, I think that this bill is quite important. And there are a couple of reasons why I think that stability and achievement is critical. First of all, to put things in scale, if we look at the greenhouse gas abatement, the emissions reductions that Maryland Department of the Environment believes are necessary to come from buildings in order to meet the state's climate goals, the goals that are in this bill maybe achieve about a quarter of that. So much more is going to be needed. But what they can do at goals at this level is that they can maintain the infrastructure and the institutional knowledge that has been built in Empower and basically keep the wheels turning and get the, I was going to say get the boat moving, but boats don't have wheels, get it moving in the direction of clean energy and achievement of the climate goals. When the legislature doesn't set goals and commissions do, they go up and down depending on who's sitting on the commission. When goals go up and down, investments go up and down, people are hired, they have to learn new things that they didn't understand before, people are let go, institutional knowledge is lost. And those kinds of, that cyclical approach to achieving goals costs more money in the long term. And the other thing that I urge you to remember with it's not really an aggressive goal, it's a status quo goal, it's actually about 80% of what's in climate solutions now, the 1.8%. That is jobs for people in Maryland. And if the investment goes down, there's going to be a loss of jobs that goes along with that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Delegate Fraser Hidalgo.
Thank you. And I know you touched on it a little bit, but why it is, compared to the other bill, why is it important that Delegate Chi, for the whole panel, that your bill sets the goals as opposed to the PSC setting the goals? From a policy perspective is my first question. And then, well, go ahead and answer that one, and then I may have a follow-up.
Well, thank you. It's like, setting up a framework, like building a house without putting infrastructure in so people can actually live in the house, right? So how do you actually get there if you don't have any specifics? Is the problem I have with the previous bill. If we are aligned, if we all agree that the Empower Maryland program needs to be reformed so that it also will make it a top priority to reduce greenhouse emission, then we need to have specific targets. And one of such is, for example, stop incentivizing burning fossil fuels and gas stoves and all that. We're not banning them, but we're just saying we should not be incentivizing them, right? And give people more incentives to switch to electricity. So that's one of the common sense goals. And also helping more people understand how to navigate the multitude of programs and resources they can take advantage of to be more effective. So I think PSC can disagree on the specifics, but the truth is we're never going to get there if we don't have some specific targets for utilities and for different ratepayer classes.
And then a follow-up, and this might be a little bit technical, but are there currently any limitations on appliances that are available between the difference between a fossil fuel burning appliance, for example, a furnace or a water heater or a gas, a stove or oven compared to what's currently available? In other words, is there a reason why you would have to go to a fossil fuel appliance as opposed to electric?
Well, I'll start, and others please chime in. I think there are, besides the cost, which is what I mentioned, right, according to the Office of People's Counsel, the cost is actually not going to be affordable for a lot of people because it's going to double and triple in the coming years, in the coming decade. But also there's tremendous health issue that people are not aware of when you burn gas stove and fossil fuel at home, for example, contributing to asthma and other health issues.
Inside
and
your
also
home.
it contributes to about 13% of the climate pollution in the state of Maryland, right? So these are the hazards that we are not aware of, that we are all collectively paying a price for. But if others have more technical knowledge on that, please chime in.
I'll chime in real quick. I'm not a technical person. I'm a lawyer, but we have done analyses and I've done a lot of reading myself. These technologies are available in many situations. They are much more cost effective. You can replace your air conditioner and your gas furnace with an electric heat pump. So you're replacing two appliances with one appliance. You know, you can completely electrify your home right now. I mean, it depends, you know, in part on the appliance, but these technologies are available and ready and cost effective in most situations.
Thank you. I actually have two questions. One, I just want to make sure that I understand the difference between the two bills. So 904 Delegate Chi sets goals and 1035 does not set goals. Is that the main difference? Okay.
Yeah, and we also disincentivize, we stop incentivizing, giving people rebates and incentives for gas powered appliances.
Okay.
And there's also language, cost recovery language that
Mr. Lapp.
would change. So-
Yeah. My second question, Delegate Chi, you said that over the next 10 to 12 years, it's estimated that gas prices are going to double or triple. But wouldn't that be the same for electric? I mean, because it's the whole supply-demand issue. The more there's a demand for something, the more it's going to cost. Is that not correct? Won't electric prices go up?
I don't have the data on electric pricing, but that is what the People's Counsel says about gas pricing.
That it would. That the gas prices would, but they didn't say anything about electric.
Because there are so many variables.
Can I respond?
Briefly.
The different, when a utility has what's called the revenue requirement, it's divided among sales, whether it be gas sales or electric sales. We know gas sales are going to decline. Everybody understands that that's the only way the state can achieve its climate goals, and we have electrification technologies that are already cost effective. So customers depart from the gas system, which means the revenue requirement has to be met over fewer sales, so rates go up. And for electricity, there are costs, but the opposite happens. We have more sales, so the utility's revenue requirement is divided among more people. And so I don't want to say rates are going to go down, but they won't go up like they are. We have a potential, what's called a death spiral, and this is acknowledged on the gas side, where costs are going to increase rapidly as customers leave the gas system, but the fixed costs of that system stay the same.
One last question, Mr. Lapp. You also mentioned about right now changing for someone to begin to change over their home from gas to electric, that there are some technologies out there and that it should be relatively easy to do. But the gentleman on the end went down a line of all of the things that have to be changed. You know, you have a gas water heater, so then you've got to have a plumber to come in to make whatever changes there, all of these things. So are you saying then that that cost would equal out?
I'm not sure what you mean by equal out.
What I mean
and I'm not
is
sure.
you talk,
Yeah.
okay, so you gave the example of replacing two appliances with an electric heat pump.
Yes.
So, so are you saying then, or are you inferring that if you begin to do those things, that the cost won't be as high for a customer because, I guess because of the offset cost savings?
Well, there's different costs in play here. Empower supports customer purchase decisions through rebates. And so what Empower does is it would incentivize, what this bill would do would incentivize that electric heat pump decision. And that is going to be lower cost for the customer to purchase one appliance instead of two appliances.
But that's really not the reality, though, because your appliances don't all go out at the same time. So, my house is 30 years old. I'm all gas, and there are many people like me. And they're, when you start thinking about their income and their disposable income and being, they have to make choices when it comes up. But I don't want the general public to think that just because we're moving to this new technology, that it's just easy. You can just flip a switch and then all of a sudden you can go out and buy all of these things and change your household over, because that's not reality for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I don't know if I said relatively easy in that context. There are no question there are challenges, and part of Empower is to help customers with those decisions. And there's an education component, and there are, that turnover of building stock is why it's important to act early, because you can replace, for example, your air conditioner. If it goes out, you can keep using your gas furnace and replace your air conditioner with a heat pump, and then it can provide your cooling, and then you may not need to replace your gas furnace. So it's important to think ahead, and that's not always what customers are doing.
Delegate Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question. We're talking about cost here. So Empower, will the budget increase for Empower?
Will the budget increase under this bill?
Under this bill?
No, this bill does not change the Empower budget. I mean, that budget is subject to the Public Service Commission's review. This bill is intended to establish a target that is the same as the status quo in terms of costs.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, seeing no further questions, that concludes this panel. Next, we will go to Garrett Fitzgerald, Alice Wilkerson, Elise Riley, Jonathan Lecoq-Nisley, and Ruth Ann Norton. Start when ready.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, for the record, I'm Garrett Fitzgerald here representing Montgomery County. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf or in support of House Bill 904. We participate in work groups convened by the Public Service Commission to help think about the future of Empower, and we count on Empower to help us reach the energy and climate goals that we've set in the county. You have our written testimony. We did not testify on HB 1035 earlier, but I'll briefly comment on how we see these two bills relative to each other. They both relate to reforming Empower, but they're really very, very different bills in what they're doing. To perhaps oversimplify, I read HB 1035 as largely codifying the existing authority of the PSC and the way the Commission currently manages Empower. It doesn't really change very much. The goals, the establishment of goals and strategies, it's all left up to the Commission to determine through the processes that it uses. It doesn't get into the kinds of policy issues that HB 904 is focused on, and vice versa. We think that, frankly, much of the content from HB 1035 is fine and could certainly be pulled into this bill. But to be clear, we believe that HB 904 very appropriately provides important and much needed policy direction to guide the Public Service Commission in planning for and managing Empower. HB 904 will establish new greenhouse gas reduction goals for Empower, helping move us toward the Climate Solutions Now goals. This will be about as cost-effective a way to do that as we will come up with. It will also improve the program by providing incentives for folks to switch from gas furnaces to electric heat pumps, which have not been available under Empower, discontinuing incentives for new gas combustion equipment, et cetera. We think this bill is very complementary to HB 169 that we just talked about in the previous item. We hope they both move forward together, and we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
I'm going to do the chair a great favor. I'm Ruth Ann Norton, Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, here in support. You've heard, I think, most of my testimony provided by others, so me too.
Thank you, and that's a reminder to everybody out there that if you're repeating testimony, that's a great example.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alice Wilkerson, Executive Director of Advance Maryland, here in favor of HB 904. At Advance Maryland, we work for a Maryland with thriving, healthy, and inclusive communities where all Marylanders have access to opportunity, including safe and affordable housing and a livable future. You've had a lot of technical testimony. I am not a technical person. I am here as an enthusiastic fan of the Empower program, and maybe I can use my time briefly to address Delegate Harrison, some of your points about, being a consumer of the program, like how we can use this best. Like, I have had 3 homes over the past couple of years. I've had an energy audit done in each of my homes. It costs $100 because of the Empower program, which makes it pretty affordable. I encourage everyone to get an energy audit. If you have not done it, please go out and do yourself a favor, get one done, because it tells you what you need to do for your home. It sets everything out for you. In my written testimony, I included the rebate form that I got in 2021 because doing my third energy audit, learned that we had unhealthy air exchange in the home. I had no idea that this was even a thing. And as part of the program, realized that we could put in a new ventilation system in the house, which we need to do. I have a kid with asthma, so that's super important to us. But also, we put in about $5,000 worth of insulation, for which we had over $2,000 in rebates because of the Empower program that honestly, I probably wouldn't have done and wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise. It was the most simplistic process possible. I set up an appointment, came out to my house, they did the audit, they walked through the whole thing and said, this is what you need. Your appliances are great. You're missing all this insulation and you really need to ventilate the house. So really encourage people to use it. It's a very user-friendly program.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Jonathan Laycock-Nisley with Interfaith Power and Light, an organization focused on connecting congregations from many different traditions to a religious response to climate change. I'm here today in support of HB 904 because Maryland faith communities have long been taking action to green our houses of worship as an act of caring. As we've learned more about the impact burning methane gas and other fossil fuels in our buildings has on our health, our climate, and our neighbors who can least afford ever-increasing gas bills, we've started the work of turning away from burning, moving from burning fossil fuels in our buildings to instead choosing clean and affordable electric heat pumps, induction stoves, and heat pump water heaters. If you turn to my written testimony, you can see pictures of dozens of people of faith from all across Maryland holding signs asking you to strengthen the Empower program for all that has breath. From members of the Ministers' Conference of Baltimore and vicinity, to Bishop Eugene Sutton of the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland, to grassroots leaders with the United Church of Christ, you'll see people of faith speaking out for an Empower program that promotes healthy air and a healthy climate. My testimony is also co-signed by 18 other faith groups from across the state, including the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, Green Muslims, Maryland Catholics for Our Common Home, the Ecumenical Leaders Group, and the policy or environmental committees of the official Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterian, UCC, and ELCA church bodies in Maryland. For the health of our common home, we can strengthen the Empower Maryland program and align it with our climate goals. For all that has breath, we can provide subsidies to help Marylanders choose cleaner appliances and prepare for those appliances to come into their home. And for neighbors struggling with high utility bills, we can ensure access to state and federal funds. We can do all these things by passing the Energy Savings Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, this concludes this panel. Next, I have Jose Coronado Flores, Chris Parts, Quentin Scott. Then we will go to the unfavorable in person, and then the one virtual favorable. Go ahead when ready.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair and Committee. My name is Jose Coronado Flores. I'm a research and policy analyst with CASA, the largest immigrant service and advocacy organization in Maryland. I want to explore a relatively untouched component of this bill, which is what it does for low-income renters, not low-income homeowners, but renters. So when it comes to retrofitting and advancing ubiquitous electrification and energy efficiency, low-income renters can feel left out of the process because they don't own their homes. But this bill sees the value of renters and the coordination that they can have with their landlords in order to promote energy efficiency and reduce the use of natural gas in some of these buildings. Not only does this bill address greenhouse gas reduction in residential buildings, but it also tangentially touches on housing conditions. Many of our members live in apartments where appliances and weatherization are subpar. Their stoves don't work or their heaters don't work. A lot of things don't work for them, sadly, and there are no incentives for landlords to fix these things. But this bill offers navigators and incentives to help landlords facilitate retrofitting buildings and improving weatherization, which would generally improve the housing conditions for a lot of people here in Maryland. So with these benefits, CASA urges a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. I'm Chris Parts, an architect representing AIA Maryland, nearly 2,000 architects across the state, and asking here for your support of House Bill 904. I'm here to speak both from professional experience in finding solutions to help renovate many older buildings and from personal experience of assessing similar conditions in a 100-year-old home. Passage of this bill will help Maryland residents to lower their energy burden and really focus on moving us toward a lower carbon footprint. I want to make 4 brief points. First is the weatherization piece is really critical. It's almost the same as pouring water into a sieve versus pouring water into a bowl. If you seal your house, you're going to keep the good air in and the cold or hot air out, and it's really essentially as simple as that. So it results in energy savings, money savings for residents in both cooling and heating cycles. Secondly, looking at the value of electrification, incentivizing the building switch over to electric heat pumps. There have been a number of studies. One, I think in my written testimony, identifies that folks could expect a savings of about $300 to $1,000 per year. Third is as a myth that air source heat pumps don't work, but I think if we take a look at Massachusetts as an example, where over 50,000 heat pumps have been installed since 2020, when Boston hit a low of 9 below zero this past year, we've never seen temperatures like that. And through understanding, asking folks if they've been able to maintain temperatures, they were. So we know that we can meet the temperatures that are needed. And then finally, the lowering the carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxide pollution from burning gas or propane in the house is critical. And particularly when we go through the weatherization, you're sealing your house and trying to contain the air a little bit more. If you're burning those fossil fuels within the house, it becomes a more toxic environment by containing that. So we ask for your support of this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chair, the members of this committee, my name is Quentin Scott. I'm the Federal Policy Director for Chesapeake Climate Action Network and a resident of Montgomery County. CCAN, along with consumer, public health, and environmental organizations, strongly support HB 904. For over 20 years, CCAN has represented over 34,000 members who want to put our state on a pathway to climate stability. I want to take a moment to specifically provide details on provisions of HB 904, which are critical to our climate goals. First, the bill adds a goal for greenhouse gas reduction as directed by the legislature. It sets incremental statewide goals that directs the PSC to determine goals for each utility company to reach an average of 1.8% reductions yearly or 14.4% by 2031. We are supporting this specific goal because we think it is the best way to shift from electric savings to greenhouse gas savings without increasing costs to ratepayers. We want to be adequately ambitious, not overly so. Second, the bill adjusts what is and what isn't incentivized using Empower funds, which is critical from a consumer perspective and an environmental perspective. This bill requires that utilities provide incentives for fuel switching and efficient electric appliance, which only opens up access for the use of federal rebates and incentives. Electric appliances for heating and cooking are tremendously more efficient than gas appliances. This bill does not mandate the use of electric, but rightly prioritizes those appliances and enables consumers to use incentives to make the switch to electric if they want to. The bill stops incentives for fossil fuel heating and appliances. And again, it does not stop anyone from buying new fossil fuel appliances. It just incentivizes them. Since electric is far more efficient, it is most impactful to spend limited resources on delivering rebates and incentives there. Subsidizing gas and oil appliances is less effective and locks in consumers to gas for decades. We respectfully request a favorable report.
Delegate Bwaffa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions for Chris, I believe you're the architect. The first question is about the cost of electrification, right? So across the state, and especially in Prince George's County, we have a lot of old homes. And say your home was built, a long time ago. Let's just go with that, not to put anyone on the spot here. But what's the average cost in your view as an architect for electrification in that manner?
I would say, and my house is 100 years old. I did electrify my house recently, and I paid just about $5,000 for that. I think that you can expect anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000. But the one piece I did want to mention is the weatherization is really an important piece of it, because if you're able to reduce your demand, you're going to reduce the size of equipment that you need for the house that you're operating. So I think that if you can weatherize your house and insulate your house very well, your demand, from what you're heating now, your demand should significantly go down so that you're able to, to require less energy to heat or cool your house.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. And then you talked a little bit about heat pumps in your testimony, right? And you're talking about moving to electric heat pumps. Right. If there's a power outage, does it make the home less reliable in that case? How does that work?
I mean, if there's a power outage and you have a gas-fired furnace, your gas-fired furnace is going to rely upon a fan to blow hot air around. So if there's a power outage, your furnace might be able to get hot, but it's not going to turn on. The thermostat's not going to trigger it. It's not going to blow air around to heat your house.
Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. We'll now go to the that concludes this panel. Now we'll now go to the in-person unfavorable. We have from the PSC both Molly Knoll and Lisa Smith. You can start when ready.
Good afternoon, committee. Again, Lisa Smith from the PSC. It's been really great to hear about all the successes of the Empower program under the oversight of the commission, including home energy audits, benefits to low-income individuals. So this has been a wonderful debate today and review of the program. As mentioned by many so far, we believe it's important to move to a greenhouse gas reduction target in line with state policy goals. I would like to point out that so far commission decisions have been made under prior law, not under the new existing law under the Climate Solutions Now Act. So I just want to be clear about that. Some decisions were referenced earlier that would be, but the commission has never even had a chance to consider even the existing law without changing it further. Primarily on our concerns for House Bill 904 concern insufficient flexibility to curb potential ratepayer impacts. House Bill 904 codifies an ambitious 2% annual greenhouse gas reduction goal that will impose unknown and significant costs on ratepayers, including our low-income ratepayers. The bill compounds these cost issues by limiting the available offerings, codifying existing energy efficiency rather than solely greenhouse gas reduction programs, and creating confusion between the utility offerings and the DHCD role and its low-income programs. The Commission has overseen the Empower program for 14 years and is committed to delivering on the statutory guidance the legislature ultimately provides this year. However, the targets and constraints in House Bill 904 will likely hinder program success and prevent the Commission from effectively overseeing program design. And the Commission will be unable to control costs pursuant to its existing statutory mandate from the legislature to ensure just and reasonable rates. The Commission believes this creates inconsistency within the public utility article, and we ask for clarity. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Molly Knoll with the Public Service Commission. I'm going to frame my comments, and I'd like them to be helpful. I've heard a number of inaccuracies and other things thrown around today, and I am hopefully just clarifying. First and foremost, the Commission has in fact set targets in the past, and the Commission's bill does include targets. There's no one here that's saying there should not be targets for greenhouse gas reductions. In 2015, the statutory targets lapsed. The Commission seamlessly picked them up. In 2016, the legislature then seamlessly took that role back from the Commission. We don't have the information to set them today, but that could happen again, where the Commission is given discretion and then the legislature steps in when there's more information to begin codifying things. Secondly, the constraints that are in this bill, they ask for a number of programs which are going to be very, very pricey, and they're going to drive deep decarbonization. But the Commission has always crafted these programs to ensure that there were offerings that were at low or no additional cost to the ratepayers. The DHCD programs reach only OHEP serves only 1 in 4 eligible customers, and the DHCD low-income programs reach only a fraction of those customers. So the majority of low-income customers in Maryland do not have access to the low-income Empower program. Because of that, the Commission has crafted school programs, no-cost QHEC programs, low-cost lighting offerings, and other things that are accessible even for folks who cannot do incredibly expensive upgrades like electrification. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about cost recovery because that was raised several times over the course of the discussion today. The cost recovery decisions that the Commission has made are already moving to an expense program. The cost recovery decisions are already reducing that return. The 20% return compared to 1 year's program costs is inaccurate. The return is paid on 2.5 years of average program costs, which was set up 15 years ago. May I make one final point? And the last thing I want to say is the question was asked whether or not program costs would increase under this bill. They absolutely will increase under both existing law and this bill. They will not remain at the current $330 million.
Delegate Boalfo.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I have a question for either one of you guys can answer this. The first is about ratepayer impacts. Can you talk to me a little bit more just from an informational standpoint on what your view is on what the ratepayer impact is going to be?
Yeah, so the current surcharge produces up to $1.60 a year in ratepayer benefits. And what that means is every dollar paid in is $1.60 that is not paid for distribution bills and is not paid for energy supply. That said, the Commission has always been cognizant that those are monies that are coming out of people's monthly budgets. And the Commission has always crafted the programs with that in mind. So with discretion, the Commission can keep those costs in control, but we may lose a bit on the cost beneficial side, and we can only do that if we have flexibility in both program offerings and in the targets until we can see both programs and costs together.
I just had one sentence I didn't quite get in, but Delegate, various parties have testified before the Commission as well that non-ratepayer funds should be used to support these programs. The legislature might look at dedicating general funds as well.
Okay, and the last thing, more of a comment if I can, Mr. Chair. So you talked about constraints in the program, right? But this bill seems to be more in line with where the General Assembly is heading from a policy standpoint and Climate Solutions Now. Are you saying that from a policy standpoint that the goals that we have set as a legislature have constraints? I'm trying to understand what you're trying to say by that.
The HB 904 codifies the QHEC offering. It codifies, it prevents offering of gas appliance rebates. It specifically limits the gas program to, I believe, shell measures and one other item, which would prevent the use of behavior programs, which are the second most cost-effective thing we can do. It basically takes a lot of things and it puts them into law, which historically have been entirely something of the commission utility and stakeholder design process. So it sticks a pin in things just at the moment where we need maximum flexibility to change things.
So that wasn't really an answer on Well, we could talk offline more a little bit, but again, my question was really about, it sounds like you're saying that there are constraints in the policy implementation and the way the General Assembly is heading and trying to move towards electrification as a whole. And again, we could talk a little bit more offline, but it really wasn't a full answer.
No, I apologize. The commission is committed to moving to greenhouse gas reductions. That is not a constraint for us. That is something the commission is committed to working on doing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. And this question, this kind of flows from my colleague and a comment Lisa made earlier. I'm just trying to get a better understanding. You made a statement about the decision-making process based on prior versus existing law. If I can just get a better understanding of what you meant there in regards to how you all arrive at your conclusion on these bills here that we've heard today, like that decision-making process, like what does that look like? Like I'm just trying to just better understand what you meant by that statement earlier.
Really appreciate that comment, Delegate, that question. So I was referencing some statements that were made by prior witnesses, and I believe there might have been some confusion. We're working on a 3-year program cycle, and we have annual reviews and annual hearings and reports and testimony from the party. There's an annual process, and which the Commission supports to continue that process and the 3-year cycles in perpetuity. The last 3-year cycle was under the law as set by the legislature prior to Climate Solutions Now. In Climate Solutions Now, there was some language added, first of all, increasing the targets from 2% to 2.5%. So I believe my colleague was referencing that will be more expensive anyway if we keep the energy efficiency target as it's set to increase. Goes from 2.5 and increases from there. And then there was also some other language added about some mutually reinforcing goals, which I'm not really sure how those would be interpreted. It's a little bit of vague language, according to our attorneys. But the Commission, my point was the Commission has never had an opportunity to have our annual process as we would. So if the legislature went home tomorrow and nothing else was decided, then the Commission would be working with what I just described that passed under Climate Solutions Now. Does that help answer the question?
That helps. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of the internal process based on how you all have to operate with what you have versus prior existing law. But that helps a lot, and we can talk more offline for sure. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
When you say decisions, when are you, or what specific decisions are you referring to?
So the commission does a number of different reviews. We do a 3-year cycle review. We'll be doing one at the end of this year. And at that point, we approve the program offerings, the program budgets, the savings that will be achieved. We have semi-annual reports that come in about how the utilities are on track to accomplish those. Those often include requests to either ramp up programs, modify programs, provide different programs, and the commission acts on those twice per year to kind of make sure everybody's on track. The other item that we get in regularly is the evaluation, management, and verification process, which is done by a lot of folks who make sure that we actually are delivering precisely what we are supposed to be delivering.
Okay, so with that in mind, I think that since we've passed Climate Solutions Now, right, there should have been 2 decisions, one in the summer and then one in December, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so in one of those, the one in the summer, it states that the PSC is not required to end gas appliance incentives under community or Climate Solutions Now, so we're not essentially going to, is how I read that. And then the other one in December says that you're not going to end putting in power and base rates, and that was just this last December. So it just seems to me like you're asking the legislature to set the goals, which this bill would do, and then you all regulate or enact the policy, because that's the purpose of the PSC.
So 2 points. First, the mutually reinforcing goal language in the CSNA is for the next program cycle. It was not in effect for the decisions that were being made at that time on the existing program cycle. And then secondly, if this legislature, this committee sets goals, the commission will absolutely execute them. What the commission cannot do right now is opine on what those goals should be. We simply don't have the analysis and information.
Okay. All right. Appreciate it. Seeing no further questions, we have one more witness virtually, and that is Josh Tolkien.
Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, Josh Tolkien with the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. Thank you for hearing my testimony. Under the Climate Solutions Now Act, the legislature has committed to 60% reductions by 2031. We do not have time to lose. This bill brings together key items from the consensus part of the Future Program Working Group, recommendations from the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, and it puts it together on a timeline that is effective. With all due respect, we're not going to hit these goals in 2031 if we continue to engage in 2, 3, and 4-year stakeholder processes. Well-intentioned, they are taking too long. I think you have the information you need and the guidance you need to be able to set the Empower program in the way that it needs to be designed. I do want to note that as recently as last June, the Commission rejected several improvement proposals to the Empower program, noting, for example, that because the Greenhouse Gas Act does not require natural gas is no longer used, therefore the Commission's removal of natural gas from Empower would go beyond the GGRA's requirements, Essentially, we've seen a pattern of the Commission looking at the bare minimum requirements of what the actual law mandates and not being willing or comfortable exploring what is possible within that. There's nothing that is in CSNA that would change that calculation. So we would expect that if you don't pass this bill, they will look at a variety of these provisions and conclude that they go beyond the mandate or the requirement. But more importantly, a lot of the provisions that were raised, some of the small concerns, we're open to being flexible about behavioral changes. I think there's room on a lot of the other smaller issues, but in terms of goals, we think that it's up to the General Assembly to set the goals for this program. And financial information is absolutely available on the timeline of this General Assembly for people to find out if they want to. You know, we had folks run the numbers. I'm sure they can too. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Seeing no questions, that concludes the witness list for this bill and this bill hearing. Next, we'll go to the final bill of the day, House Bill 839, Delegate Chi. Huh?
Oh, there's one more. I thought there was one more.
Okay, I lied. There's 2 bills left, but we'll still go to 839.
All right, we'll be quick. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, let me call on my panel. Rob, Thad, Jordan. Hi, good to see you again. All right. Okay, good afternoon again, colleagues of Economic Matters Committee. I'm Delegate Lily Chi, glad to be back to present HB 839, the Maryland Resilient and Clean Energy Homes Act. HB 839 is an innovative, cutting-edge, and a cost-effective way to plan ahead for our growing electrification needs on the home front, literally. The bill requires each of the investor-owned electric companies, which in Maryland means Pepco, Delmarva, BGE, and Potomac Edison, to apply to the Public Service Commission a new 3-year pilot program that the Commission is to establish in order to support and manage residential electrification. We know the era of electrification is upon us. As more of our residents opt for electric vehicles and appliances, the demand is going to surge. The federal government has a goal of having all new car sales be electric vehicles by 2030. And the Maryland consumers are shifting away increasingly from reliance on fossil fuels. So with the rapidly increasing demand on the electric system, we are looking at significant and costly upgrades to our grid system if we don't proactively manage the demand upfront. So this bill essentially incentivizes partnerships between the utility companies and consumers to make the grid more efficient and less costly for ratepayers. Specifically, this pilot program would include 4 components. First is an electrification make-ready program to provide a credit to offset the costs of installing electrification measures, such as battery storage. Second is an upfront rebate program for on-site clean energy systems. Third is a multifamily housing clean energy incentive program to create on-site resilience and achieve cost savings. Fourth is a load management program that Maryland residents that receive incentives are required to participate. So these measures work together. They are designed to provide resiliency and flexibility to lower the impact on our grid system while saving the costs for customers and the utilities. I have to say that this bill does put some guardrails on the costs of the program. Specifically, it says the money for incentives cannot be more than 1% of a utility's total revenue, or equivalent to $15 million, whichever is less. This is a small price compared to the tremendous cost on the grid upgrades that we're looking at down the road. The bill also mentions that the pilot program should take into account the potential and anticipated federal and the state incentive programs for home electrification. We fully expect Maryland to receive certain amount of federal assistance on that home front to switch to electrification. We also expect in that regard that the Maryland Energy Administration will be working with PSC and other partners to offer a set of robust programs for our consumers. In case you wonder where the utilities are on this pilot program, you might be surprised that they are all in favor, with some amendments that we are happy to incorporate, such as extending the timeline for application, for approval, for implementation, and put more, guidelines on how consumers can adopt the meter collars and et cetera. So that's to be discussed. But the bottom line is this is a win-win strategy for consumers, for utilities, and the state of Maryland in managing our journey to electrification while reaching our climate goals. So with that, thank you very much, and I urge a favorable report.
Great. Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee, I want to thank Delegate Chi for sponsoring House Bill 839. Look, we're in a transformative decade. We really are. I mean, with what this legislature has already done, with what's been done recently at the federal level, and we have a number of bills this session dealing with electric vehicles, with storage. A lot is going to happen over that next decade, between now and 10 years from now. And what this bill does is it does build on the Empower program, which has been very effective. I know there's some other bills that you're considering on it, but it has a strong track record. Every dollar invested has brought a $1.61 return on investment. $13 billion in savings. Less transmission constructed. There's a lot of great things that the current program has done. This bill builds on that. We are going to have more electric cars, a lot more electric cars. We're going to have homes with storage. We're going to have more homes with solar panels. How do we have the panel upgrades? How do we have the infrastructure to handle that? This bill addresses that. And it builds on the Empower Maryland program to accomplish it, a proven program. What I'd like to do is turn it over to Thad Culley, the legislative chair for CHESA, to get into a little more details of how it would work. But commend Delegate Chi and urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Sir, quickly, I know this is your first time testifying. You're nervous. Can you state your name for the record?
I'm sure Hannah's watching this too. Rob Garagiola with Compass on behalf of CHESA. Thank you. That inexperience.
Great. I truly am a rookie to here, so this is a pleasure to be before you today. My name is Thad Culley, Senior Manager of Policy for Sunrun and the Maryland Policy Chair for CHESA, Chesapeake Solar and Storage Association, and here to speak in favor of House Bill 839. So I just want to turn to the dialogue that was between Delegate Harrison and Mr. Lapp. I think this really comes to the heart of the question is how do we keep rates affordable and reasonable as we move to electrification? And as Delegate Chi mentioned, if we do not manage this pathway, we could be looking at billions to tens of billions of dollars of upgrades over the next 10 to 20 years. Managed, however, the hope is that we can mitigate that and actually put a downward pressure on rates. And how do we get there? If we increase the volume of sales through electrification, but manage to keep the cost of the grid in check or very reasonably growing, we could actually reduce the per unit cost of electricity. And that is the great hope of electrification, if done right, that it's a net benefit to ratepayers. But how does this bill get there? So I'm very excited about this bill and the Maryland Resilient and Clean Energy Homes Act. Rolls off the tongue, of course, but it's really a first of its kind because it pairs a couple of concepts together that maybe aren't necessarily new. First, the make-ready credit for the main panel upgrade, that is done in many states. But what is unique is pairing that receipt of that rebate with a commitment to participate in load management. And that is the portion where we hope to see consumers drive the solutions to help reduce the impacts on the grid. Now, seeing I only have 20 seconds left, I do want to note this has been a very collaborative process coming up with this concept and continues to be. And I know, as Delegate Chi mentioned, there are lots of ongoing conversations and feel that the gaps are narrowing and getting very close. So with that, we would ask for a favorable report, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the members of this committee. My name is Jordan Graham, and I'm a Senior Energy Policy Advisor at Tesla, which manufactures and installs solar and battery energy storage systems. I'm here to support HB 839, and more specifically to explain why the portion of this bill supporting the adoption of meter collar adapters is important to speeding up the pace of residential solar and storage installs. So meter collar adapters are devices installed between the utility meter and the meter socket, which can facilitate the installation of various clean energy technologies. And the main thing to understand about meter collars is simply that the location of installation allows installers of solar and storage to bypass the need for significant electrical upgrades, including avoiding extensive rewiring and often avoiding the need for electric panel upgrades. The ability to avoid this extra work allows solar and storage systems to be installed more than 10 times faster and at a lower cost to customers. This faster pace of installation helps to remove barriers to meeting state clean energy targets. So in short, the approval of meter collars presents a no-cost policy to make clean energy installations both faster and less expensive, and we believe the rules should allow for such cost reductions that are beneficial to customers. Tesla's own meter collar, the backup switch, helps provide whole home backup by seamlessly transitioning homes from grid to backup power during outages. The backup switch has been installed in over 24 utility territories without safety issue. The device is certified to relevant UL safety standards, as would be required under HB 839, and we've worked closely with utilities to ensure that utility workers know how to interact with meter collar devices. Currently, all the investor-owned utilities in Colorado, Arizona, Utah, and California either are required to approve meter collars or are on a path to doing so. Legislation introduced in Illinois and New Jersey would do the same. So as states look for ways to decarbonize the grid at a rapid pace, meter collars are reducing some of the complexity to the benefit of customers and solar installers and at no cost to ratepayers. Thank you.
All right, seeing no questions for this panel, we will now go to two in-person information, David Lapp and Lisa Smith. You can start when ready.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee. David Lapp here for the Office of People's Counsel. I just wanted to make a few points. We are very supportive of electrification and of many aspects of this bill. And we're working with the bill sponsors. I just want to share a couple quick points about the cost recovery. We're very concerned about the cost of this bill as it's drafted. It resembles Empower in terms of having rebates, but the cost recovery is very different than Empower. Costs are put in the rate base, not into a surcharge and expensed. And that means costs are recovered over the much longer term at a much higher cost to customers. And because it's not in the surcharge, there's not the transparency that you have with Empower. It's not subject to the cost effectiveness tests and other aspects of Empower, nor to the stakeholder process. There is a cap on spending in the bill, which we think is appropriate, but there's also an exception to the cap that just allows a request from a utility to come in and ask for more spending without a limit. And we're happy to answer any questions that anybody has. Thank you very much.
Lisa Smith, Director of Legislative Affairs for the Maryland Public Service Commission. Thank you, Chair Crosby and committee members again. We are here to provide informational comments only on House Bill 839, which creates a series of utility programs aimed at accelerating the clean energy transition. The PSC supports the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals and will continue to oversee the utility efforts to meet these climate policy challenges. And to that end, we appreciate the proponents and sponsor of the bill for working with us since before session. We understand there were some drafting issues, so I think we've been in constant communication, and I believe some of our comments are being addressed, but I'll just outline them quickly. The first concern with the bill related to overly aggressive timelines for both program and budget review. We want to make sure that this is implemented efficiently and successfully. The legislation allows only 90 days for the Commission to consider utility applications to provide the services. However, within those 90 days, the technical staff and stakeholders will need to review the plans and provide feedback, after which the Commission will need to draft and issue an order, and these are potentially large programs that the Commission will have to consider on applications from all investor-owned utilities simultaneously, as well as the Office of People's Counsel. The Commission requests a longer time for application review, so we look forward to discussing that further. And similarly, the Commission requests to exceed the statutory budget caps would have only 30 days to review, and we request a lengthened timeline for that as well. Finally, the bill provides for the Commission to approve, modify, or deny the utility applications. However, there is no criteria or factors to consider in making those decisions. As discussed, where the Commission is the implementer, not the policymaker, we need more guidance here. The programs are also not required to be cost-effective, as OPC discussed, and the committee may want to consider providing additional guidance in that area as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, that concludes this bill hearing, and now we will go to the final bill, I promise, of the day, House Bill 910, Delegate Frazier Hidalgo. Delegate, do you have a panel? Oh, bring them all up. You know what? Let's just bring up all the favorables. Nitzen Goldberger, Morris Cyphers, Evan Vaughn, Isaac Meyer. And we'll bring up Jeannie Morris, but Miss Morris, you'll go at the end because you are favorable with amendments. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair. It's so confusing. It didn't used to be so confusing. Now it's confusing, Mr. Vice Chair.
It's chair.
Chair.
And then the only moment, well, whatever, I'm not even going to go into it, but the chair will be texting all of us to remind everybody that I'm the vice chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And members of the committee, thank you very much for allowing myself and my panel to present House Bill 910 today. House Bill 910 is an energy storage bill, and as this committee is well aware, in order for us to meet our Climate Solutions Now goals, our Clean Energy Jobs Act goals, all the goals that we've set forth in the last few years, we need to figure out a way, as we electrify the grid, we need to figure out a way how to store electricity in a clean manner. So what this bill does is it sets a goal, and it asks the Public Service Commission to come up with a framework to implement those goals and sets those goals. And those goals basically are 3,000 megawatts of electricity in storage by the year 2033. It steps up as time goes on, so it's not immediate or sudden. And as you all know, this is extraordinarily important for us moving forward when it comes to public health and when it comes to every aspect of what this committee is more than well knows what we need to do. So I do want to make a point, because I think it's very important, and you'll hear from some of the advocates, that this bill is actually extraordinarily agnostic when it comes to what is storage. I know we have a lot of conversations around battery storage, which is very appropriate, right? But there is a lot of other kinds of storage, and this bill is agnostic on it because it wants to incentivize the idea of new technologies. You'll hear about some really cool technologies, and it's all storage. So storage is storage. It doesn't have to just be batteries. This committee also, along with E&T, passed a bill last year, part of the Climate Solutions Now bill. Part of that bill had a storage component for electric school buses. You probably remember that. But that was a very inventive way of creating storage by allowing electric school buses to charge up in the summer months when they're not being used, and then being used to backfill grid and deal with PICO-related issues. So this is the same concept, that's just not on a school bus. The utilities are also positive on this bill, as you can see, and that is very exciting to me when everybody gets on the same page on these things. So I don't necessarily need to go into all of the details. As most of you already know, this would probably support somewhere in the neighborhood of 71,000 jobs in an industry that is expected to grow dramatically. And I will leave it there and then pass it to the panel, and then go with questions, if that's all right with you.
Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee, my name is Evan Vaughn. I'm Deputy Director of the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition. We represent over 40 utility-scale storage, wind, and solar developers who are active in Maryland and across PJM. I want to thank you for your consideration of this legislation. We strongly support its passage. Merrick Action's member companies do believe that this program is essential to spur new storage project investment, especially at utility scale in the state of Maryland. As the bill sponsor said, the bill accomplishes two major goals. It would establish a 3,000 megawatt 10-year target for energy storage in Maryland, and it would offer the PSC the maximum flexibility to design a procurement program to meet that target. Energy storage is a vital resource, and it's so far been missing from Maryland's plans for a zero carbon grid, alongside a robust solar, wind, and diverse clean energy mix. Maryland's admirable clean energy targets, including the Clean Energy Jobs Act and the Climate Solutions Now Act, do require us to take some ambitious steps in the state of Maryland, and storage will be a key component of that. Storage enables us to produce clean energy when it's abundant and, more importantly, cheap, and subsequently store it and put it back onto the grid when it's needed. The ability to shift that energy generation over time from those times when it's cheap to the times when it's needed helps us meet peak demand, not only effectively, safely, and reliably, but also in a clean fashion. As many of you know, the most dirty period on the energy grid is often when peak demand is happening. Energy storage provides key flexibility for grid operators. It's instantly dispatchable and can function both as a generation source and as a source of load by absorbing clean energy. It can help the grid adjust to fluctuations in supply and demand, optimize the market efficiency of the grid, and alleviate transmission congestion. As somebody much more clever than I once said, you can think of storage a little bit like bacon. It makes everything just a little bit better. And with that, I'll conclude my testimony, and I encourage you to support the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Isaac Meyer, Manager of Government Affairs at EDP Renewables, here in support of House Bill 910. First off, thank you to the delegate for his leadership on this issue, as well as this committee for your leadership on renewable energy issues over the years. First and foremost, energy storage safely captures and stores energy to be used at a later time on demand when it is most needed. The mechanism enhances reliability, reduces costs, and increases grid resilience. EDPR owns and operates 8,200 megawatts of renewable energy projects spread across 58 wind projects and 9 solar projects. But battery storage technology is of key importance to us. We're looking at it both standalone, where the project literally pools energy off the grid and redeploys it when it's most needed, but also co-located next to a wind project or a solar farm, where it can literally capture that excess energy and redeploy when it was most needed. So what we're really doing is changing the character profile of renewable energy from what would look like intermittent variable energy to really a base load capacity type of energy. So it's a really dynamic technology. So in closing, HB 910 really creates the market mechanisms and sends the market signals for renewable energy storage developers to contract and finance battery energy storage projects. So with that, I urge a favorable report on HB 910.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby and members of the committee. I'm Maura Cyphers. I'm the Eastern Region State Affairs Director for the American Clean Power Association. ACP is the nation's largest clean power trade association, and we are here in strong support today of House Bill 910. There are three things very quickly about energy storage that I want to highlight. One is sort of the types of projects we're talking about. The American energy transformation is going to require an all of the above approach, and the sponsor's amendment highlights the variety of technology out there. There will be ways, residential, grid scale, commercial, that we hit this 3,000 megawatt target. And our members in particular are building projects, energy storage projects that connect directly to the grid and can power tens of thousands of homes at a time. Projects at this scale have a modest footprint. They co-locate well with other types of generation. And getting to my other 2 points, they are affordable and they strengthen grid reliability. Wind and solar, as you've heard, are the cheapest sources of electricity. As we start to electrify more sectors of our economy, storage can help integrate wind and solar a little bit more effectively onto our grid. This is the only grid technology that can both store and discharge energy. Storage really will improve our grid efficiency. It's instantly dispatchable, functions as generation and load, and it can help alleviate some transmission congestion and sort of put an end to some of the curtailment that we see on a lot of our clean power projects today. These functions, all of the above, reduce system costs. They'll really bring down costs for all. And you know what? I would just close with this. Finally, they're batteries, just like our phone batteries. They're going to help back up, prevent against blackouts, brownouts, and really serving as that important backup power for homes, businesses, and communities. So we'd ask for your favorable report.
Ms. Morris, go ahead, but just for everybody's knowledge, she is favorable with amendments, which is different than the first four.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeannie Morris, and I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs for Vicinity Energy. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on House Bill 910. Vicinity supports this bill, and we also support the inclusion of an amendment to clarify that thermal energy storage would qualify as an energy storage system, and including credits for the dispatch of stored thermal energy to an interconnected thermal energy distribution network. In Baltimore, Vicinity distributes steam, hot water, and chilled water to over 30 million square feet of commercial space. The city's most vital infrastructure benefits from our 99.99% reliability and enhanced resiliency to natural disasters. The backbone of our own decarbonization plan is to electrify our operations by generating steam using electric boilers and heat pumps and procuring renewable electricity from the grid as our primary fuel source, giving our customers the ability to successfully meet state regulations with 100% carbon-free thermal energy. Thermal energy storage systems allow Vicinity to procure the greenest, most affordable electricity when it is available. Today, we supply city buildings with cooling and chilled water services using one of the largest ice thermal storage systems in the country, which utilizes ice to augment electrical chilling capacity during the day. This helps take the pressure off the grid and reduce electricity during peak demand, while also helping reduce costs for our customers. Our future decarbonization plan includes the installation of up to 1,000 megawatt hours of thermal storage. Using a molten rock technology, thermal storage will allow us to mitigate both the cost and carbon content of electrified steam by procuring renewable energy during the overnight hours when it is available, and storing it in a thermal battery until the district heating demand is high, typically when buildings heat up for the workday, dramatically lowering the average cost of renewable thermal energy for our customers. Thank you again to the committee and for the delegate for taking the lead on this issue. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Delegate Charkoudian.
Mr. Chair, I just, to Delegate Fraser Hidalgo, I'm a little confused because you started by saying it was technology neutral, and I'm reading the MEA letter, and it looks like their understanding is that it is 220,000 Tesla Powerwalls, which would cost $2.75 billion, and I'm just wondering if you want to comment on that.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question, Delegate Charkoudian. I'll answer a little bit, and if the panel wants to as well. We received this letter yesterday from MEA, which basically says that in order to achieve this, it would be the cost of 220,000 Tesla Powerwalls, and that the cost of that would be $2.75 billion. I want to stress that I'm very concerned with this letter, and the reason I'm very concerned with this letter is because this letter is extraordinarily factually inaccurate. Not only is the letter factually inaccurate, it comes from not actually knowing what you're talking about. And it really pains me that MEA put this letter together, but they did. And here's the example. A Powerwall is about 4 feet by 3 feet, and it can be in your basement or it can be somewhere else. That's what a Powerwall is. So if you were to order 220,000 of them, that wouldn't be a very smart investment. You would do something like a mega pack, which is big or bigger than this room. So it would be the equivalent, their pricing is the equivalent of going into 7-Eleven and saying, I want 225,000 Coca-Cola products, and I want to buy each can, and I want to pay $4 for each can of Coke, as opposed to going to Coca-Cola and saying, hey, I'd like to buy a couple of truckloads of Coke. So I can't even put into words how bad the math is on this. It is mind-boggling how poorly thought out this letter is. And it really pains me to say that, but I have to say it. So I know that some of the members of the panel have similar thoughts. They've actually delved a little bit deeper into the math. And with all that said, I did, because the letter specifically calls out Tesla. So what I did is I called Tesla and I asked them, is this accurate? And Tesla said to me, back of the napkin, very quick math, that they could probably do this project, depending on how the Public Service Commission lays out the framework, if it's similar to another project that they might be working on, could probably do this project for basically 1/5 of that cost or less. They came up with somewhere between 800, maybe 400 to $800 million, not 2.75 million. And I stress that because they called out Tesla specifically, not me.
Well, that was one of the greatest answers ever. Okay, with that, Delegate Chi.
Actually, I also had the same baffling question, but thank you for answering that. My question is answered.
Sure. And Mr. Vice Chair, I don't know if you want to indulge, but some of the folks on this panel that are more well-versed in this than I am have a response as well. But if you don't,
I think you nailed the point. Okay. Well, that concludes this panel. We have two information. That is Brett Sproul and Lisa Smith.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. My name is Brett Sproul from the Public Service Commission. I'm here today for House Bill 910, which seeks to make a permanent energy storage program within the state. The PSC has had productive meetings with the bill sponsor and staff and has proposed two modifications that will enhance this legislation. Our two concerns are, number one, limiting the energy storage deployment to cost-effective projects only, and number two, allotting additional time for the PSC to develop the energy storage program. For my first concern, this bill proposes an ambitious target, and currently there are little means for the Commission to ensure that the projects are constructed in the most cost-effective manner. The proposed legislation should be amended to give the Commission discretion to only permit the deployment of cost-effective energy storage projects. For my second concern, HB 910 would likely require the Commission to engage in a rulemaking process or initiate a case in order to implement all aspects of the program. A July 1, 2024 start date is too quick for such a development. Additionally, the Commission is currently conducting an energy storage pilot, as previously referenced, as required by the legislature, which will not be concluded until 2026. There's information being gathered in this pilot that would be useful for program development. Ideally, the development of this program would be delayed until 2026 to utilize this information, but a delay until 2025 would be acceptable to effectively develop the program. I will yield my time to answer any questions, and thank you for allowing me to speak.
Okay, seeing no questions, that concludes this bill hearing and the bill hearings for today. Members, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back in here to go over our brief voting session.
Struggling because this week there was
So what's going on? You're good. Don't worry about it. And it's all going to get up. We feel good about it, but